Section 1. Welcome to Quahog, the town that shouldn't exist. Close your eyes for just a moment. Not completely keep just enough awareness to follow along, but let your body settle into wherever you are right now. Let your shoulders drop, let your breath slow. Because what we're about to explore tonight isn't just a cartoon, it's a place. A very strange, very specific place that has been quietly accumulating mysteries for over 2 decades. A town on the coast of Rhode Island that, on the surface, looks like any other working-class New England suburb, but the longer you stare at it, the less it makes sense. That town is Quahog, and Quahog is hiding something. To understand what makes Quahog so strange, you have to start with what it claims to be. According to the show, Quahog is a real town. Not a stand-in for somewhere else, not a thinly veiled allegory. It uses real Rhode Island geography, real zip codes, real landmarks. The characters reference Providence. They drive to Boston. The local news station, Channel 5, has actual weather maps with real Massachusetts and Rhode Island geography behind the anchor. On the surface, Family Guy has always insisted that Quahog is a real place that you could theoretically visit. Except you can't, because Quahog doesn't exist on any map. There is a real town called Quahog in Rhode Island, or rather, there's a neighborhood by that name in the town of North Providence, but it bears almost no resemblance to the Quahog in the show. The show's Quahog has a coastline, a harbor, a town square, a local TV station, a prestigious country club, a bustling downtown, a seedy bar district, a Pawtucket brewery, and apparently enough population to sustain all of it. Real-world Quahog is a residential neighborhood that most people in Rhode Island have never heard of. Seth MacFarlane, the show's creator, grew up in Kent, Connecticut. When he was designing the show in the late 1990s, he needed a setting somewhere that felt like a real place, without being a specific real place, somewhere that had the flavor of working-class New England without the constraints of actual geography. He landed on Rhode Island almost by feel. It had the right energy, small enough to feel provincial, close enough to Boston to borrow its cultural gravity, coastal enough to give the setting texture. But here's where it gets interesting. MacFarlane didn't just pick a vague somewhere in Rhode Island, he gave Quahog a specific address. The Griffin family lives at 31 Spooner Street, Quahog, Rhode Island. He gave it a zip code, 00093. That zip code doesn't exist. Real Rhode Island zip codes are in the 28XX and 29XX ranges. 00093 is a ghost. So Quahog exists in a kind of quantum state real enough to feel grounded, impossible enough to do whatever the story needs it to do. It has geography that shifts, distances that change, a downtown that's sometimes a 5-minute walk from the Griffin house and sometimes requires a car, a waterfront that moves depending on the episode, a town that is simultaneously intimate enough for everyone to know each other and large enough to have a stadium, an airport, and a mayor. That mayor, by the way, is Mayor Adam West, played by the real Adam West, the actor famous for his role as Batman in the 1960s television series. And this is the first of many layers in Quahog's strangeness. The show doesn't just take place in a fictional version of Rhode Island. It takes place in a world where Adam West, the real person, with his real history, chose to become the mayor of a fictional town. Not a character named after Adam West. Adam West. He acknowledges being the Batman actor. He has the same biography. He just also happens to be the mayor of Quahog. What does that mean for the world of the show? It means Quahog exists in a universe where real people and fictional people share the same space. The Griffins are fictional. Adam West is real. Tom Tucker, the news anchor, is fictional. But when Peter references The Godfather or Bruce Willis or Madonna, those are real people, real films, real histories, the same ones that exist in our world. The show's universe is not a parallel world where history played out differently. It's our world, with fictional people quietly living inside it. This creates a strange philosophical texture to Quahog. The town shouldn't be able to hold together. Real physics and fictional physics sit side by side. Real geography butts up against impossible geography. And somehow the whole thing keeps moving forward. The Drunken Clam is one of the show's most consistent locations, the bar where Peter, Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe drink away their afternoons. It's been established as being close to the Griffin house, close enough to walk home drunk. But the bar itself seems to have no fixed position in the town. It's always nearby, always accessible, never precisely located. The same is true of the Quahog Savings Bank, the cemetery, the mall, the high school. They're all in Quahog. They're all close when the story needs them to be close. This is, of course, the nature of a TV show's geography. Sets are built to serve stories, not maps. But Family Guy goes further than most shows in insisting on geographic specificity while refusing to be bound by it. Other animated shows set in fictional towns don't try to convince you the town is real. Quahog does. And then there's the matter of Quahog's history. The town has an origin story, a colonial-era founding that the show occasionally references. The Griffin family's ancestor, Nate Griffin, was apparently present at the founding of America. The show has done episodes set in the colonial period with Nate as a character. He's depicted as an enslaved man who had a relationship with a woman named Lois, and this relationship is presented as the origin of the Griffin family line. It's a complicated, uncomfortable piece of backstory, one that the show has handled with varying degrees of care, but it establishes that the Griffin family has deep roots in this region. Peter Griffin is not a newcomer to New England. His family has been here since before the United States was a country, which raises an interesting question. If Quahog has a real colonial history embedded in the show's mythology, and that history involves real events like the founding of America, then at what point did the fictional and the real diverge? When did the world where Quahog exists start being different from the world where we exist? One fan theory suggests the answer is never. That Quahog exists in an almost perfect overlay of our world, and the only thing that makes it different is that certain fictional families, the Griffins, the Browns, the Swansons, the Quagmires, happen to live there. The history is the same. The geography is the same, roughly. The culture is the same. It's just that this specific street, in this specific impossible zip code, contains people who couldn't exist. There's something strangely beautiful about that idea. The notion that reality has these little pockets, invisible neighborhoods where the rules are slightly different, where cartoon logic applies, where a talking baby can build a laser and nobody files a report. The show began in 1999, was canceled in 2002, and then came back in 2005 after DVD sales demonstrated there was an audience. That revival is itself a piece of Quahog's mythology. It's referenced in the show, with characters literally aware that the show was canceled and brought back. The town knows it was abandoned and returned to. The characters know they live in a television show, and yet they keep living. This is the thing about Quahog that gets under your skin if you spend enough time there. It's not just that the show has continuity errors or that the geography is inconsistent. It's that the show seems to acknowledge these things, to fold them into its own identity, to make the impossibility of Quahog part of the point. The town shouldn't exist. It can't exist. But every week, for over 20 years, it does. And the Griffin family sits at the center of it. Peter, Lois, Meg, Chris, Stewie, and Brian. A family that shouldn't work, a loud, impulsive father, a patient and quietly complicated mother, 3 children with wildly different trajectories, and a dog who is, in many ways, the most human person in the house. They live at 31 Spooner Street, in a house that changes size depending on what the show needs, on a street where the neighbors are always close enough to matter and far enough to give the illusion of privacy. As you get comfortable tonight, just let that image settle in. A house on a street, in a town that doesn't exist. A family that shouldn't hold together. A dog reading Dostoevsky in the living room. A baby who has already drafted plans for a weather control device. This is Quahog, and we've barely started. Before we move on, take a second to drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. There's something wonderful about knowing that people all over the world are settling in for the same strange journey tonight. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe. There's a lot more of this ahead, and you won't want to miss it. The mysteries of Quahog are not the kind that resolve with a single answer. They accumulate, they layer, they fold back on themselves. Each question you ask about this town leads to 3 more questions, and those questions lead to places you didn't expect to go. That's the nature of a show that has been running for this long. It generates a mythology almost by accident, the way sediment builds up on a riverbed, slowly, invisibly, until one day you look down and realize there's something solid there. Let's talk about the show's relationship with time, because it's central to understanding why Quahog feels the way it does. The show operates under what's called a floating timeline. Characters don't age, seasons don't accumulate, the year is always roughly the present. In the first season, set in the late 1990s, Stewie is a baby. In a season airing in the 2020s, Stewie is still a baby. Peter has been roughly 42 years old for a quarter century. Lois has been in her early 40s since before the year 2000. This is standard for animated sitcoms. The Simpsons pioneered it, South Park uses it, Bob's Burgers does the same. Characters don't age because aging would eventually end the show. So, time is frozen. The present is always now, but Family Guy does something slightly different from its peers. It allows history to shift. In early seasons, Peter's backstory places him as a child in the 1970s. In later seasons, events from that same period are updated to feel more recent. References that were made in Season 2 to Vietnam-era history don't quite line up with references made in Season 15 to the same characters' pasts. The history of Quahog is not fixed. It rewrites itself to stay contemporary, and nobody in the town seems to notice. This is more than a continuity error. It's a metaphysical feature of Quahog. The town exists in a permanent present, not just in terms of character ages, but in terms of the entire world's history. The past is whatever it needs to be. The future never arrives. There is only now, in Quahog, always. And there's a kind of peace in that, if you let yourself feel it. A place where the clock doesn't move forward, where nothing is permanently lost because nothing really ends. Where a family can have the same Sunday dinner 1,000 weeks in a row and the food is always warm. Quahog is strange. Quahog is impossible. But it's also, in its way, eternal. The sun sets over 31 Spooner Street. The lights inside the Griffin house glow amber through the windows. In the living room, Brian is stretched out on the sofa with a book he keeps meaning to finish. In the kitchen, Lois is somewhere between contentment and quiet frustration. Upstairs, Meg is in her room with the door locked, which is where she always seems to be. Chris is probably eating something. Stewie is in his crib, but the crib is a formality. He hasn't stayed in it since he learned to pick the latch. And Peter is somewhere in the middle of all of it, large, loud, inconsistent, infuriating, and somehow, despite everything, the gravitational center of a family that keeps pulling back together no matter how many times it flies apart. This is where we begin. In the living room of a house on a street in a town that shouldn't exist. And from here, the mysteries go deep. There's one more thing worth noting about Quahog before we move deeper into its mysteries. The show has a complicated relationship with its own canon, with what counts as real within the world of the show versus what counts as a cutaway joke, a fantasy, a dream sequence, or a fourth wall break. Family Guy uses all of these techniques constantly, and it doesn't always signal clearly which mode it's in. A character will be in the middle of a genuine emotional scene, and then Peter will say, "This is just like that time and we're suddenly watching a parody of a 1970s kung fu film with Peter as the star. Is that memory? Imagination? Pure comedic interruption? The show never quite says. And over time, these cutaways accumulate into a kind of shadow biography for every character, thousands of hours of implied experience that may or may not have actually happened to them, told in 30-second fragments that vanish as quickly as they appear. Quahog is a town built partly of these fragments, of half-remembered experiences and imagined histories and jokes that became, through sheer repetition, almost true. The Quahog you're falling asleep to tonight is not just the town on the screen, it's the town built from 25 years of cutaways, of throwaways, of things that were said once and never followed up on. It is the most densely layered fictional town in television history, and we are only just beginning to look at it. Let the warmth of that thought carry you as we go forward. There is so much more to discover here. So many rooms in this house we haven't opened yet. So many streets in this town we haven't walked down. Rest easy. We're going deeper. Section 2. The Chicken Fights. A War Without an Origin. There are certain things in Family Guy that exist in a category beyond explanation. They are not mysteries to be solved so much as phenomena to be observed, events that the show presents with complete seriousness, that the characters treat as absolutely real, but that resist every attempt at rational analysis. The most sustained and elaborate of these phenomena is Peter Griffin's ongoing conflict with Ernie the Giant Chicken. If you've watched even a handful of Family Guy episodes, you know what the chicken fights are. Peter is somewhere the parking lot of a restaurant, a street corner, the lobby of a building, and Ernie the Giant Chicken appears. Something is said. A slight is registered. And then the two of them fight. Not a quick scuffle, not a brief altercation. A full, cinematic, destruction-causing brawl that lasts for minutes, travels across the entire town and sometimes beyond, destroys property on a massive scale, and ends with one of them apparently dead only for the other to walk away and resume normal life as though nothing happened. The fights are extraordinary pieces of animation and choreography. They're shot and edited like action sequences from a real film, wide angles, impact cuts, environmental destruction, exhaustion and recovery, and escalation. They take the logic of a cartoon fight and apply the visual grammar of a Hollywood movie. The effect is both absurd and genuinely impressive. But the question that keeps coming back, the one the show has never fully answered, is why? What is the origin of this war? The official in-show answer is given very early. In the second season episode Da Boom, which aired in December 1999, the backstory is briefly established. Ernie the giant chicken, who is, without comment or explanation, a giant anthropomorphic chicken in a suit, gave Peter a coupon. The coupon was expired. Peter was embarrassed. This humiliation was apparently so profound that it created a blood feud. That's it. That's the reason. An expired coupon. Now, the joke, of course, is the disproportion. The fights are so enormous, so violent, so elaborately destructive that the inciting incident, a coupon that turned out to be past its use-by date, becomes funnier the more you think about it. The violence is insane. The cause is trivial. That gap is the comedy. But fans have spent years wondering whether there's more to it. Whether the expired coupon is the whole story or just the story Ernie told Peter. Whether the real origin of the feud goes deeper into territory the show has never explicitly charted. The show has, over the years, given Ernie a life outside the fights. He has a wife, Nicole, who is also a giant chicken. They have children. Ernie holds a job. He has a social circle. He is, in every way that matters, a functioning member of Quahog's community, accepted without comment, employed, married, a neighbor. The show never addresses the fact that he is a giant chicken. Other characters don't react to it. He simply exists alongside humans as though this is normal. This normalization is itself a piece of the mystery. If Ernie were the only giant chicken, his existence would demand explanation. But in the world of the show, he's not unusual enough to comment on, which suggests that the world of Family Guy is one in which anthropomorphic animals are simply part of the landscape, present, functional, unremarkable. And yet Ernie and Peter have this war. One fan theory that has gained significant traction focuses on the timing of the fights. They don't happen constantly, they happen periodically, in clusters, separated sometimes by many episodes. The theory suggests that the fights aren't random encounters, but deliberate meetings. That Ernie and Peter have, at some level, an understanding. That the brawls serve a purpose neither of them fully acknowledges. Some theorists go further and suggest that the fights represent Peter's only outlet for a certain kind of energy, the violence and chaos that his personality generates, but that his family life and social norms keep suppressed. Peter can't physically fight with Lois, or Joe, or his boss Opie, but Ernie is a space where the full force of Peter's physical and emotional aggression can be expressed without consequence. The property gets destroyed. People get hurt, apparently. But nobody files charges. Nobody holds anyone accountable. The fight ends and life continues. There's a theory that Ernie knows this. That Ernie, for reasons of his own, perhaps a kind of chicken biology aggression cycle, perhaps genuine pleasure in combat, perhaps something more complex, is a willing participant in this arrangement. The expired coupon was not the cause of the feud. It was just the moment when two compatible combatants recognized each other. The fights have become increasingly cinematic over the seasons. The first few were relatively simple, extended, but not especially elaborate. By the later seasons, they've become genuine set pieces that reference action films, use slow motion and dramatic music, and feel like the show is genuinely investing in the spectacle of them. There's an episode where the fight takes place in an airplane, then continues as they fall from the airplane, then continues underwater. Another where the fight moves from a building to a construction site, to the roof of a skyscraper. The ambition of these sequences is notable precisely because they don't advance any plot. They're not building to a resolution of the feud. Ernie and Peter always end up in more or less the same relationship after the fight as before it. The world is reset. The slate is wiped. The feud continues. Which raises the most interesting question of all. Has the feud always existed, or did it begin with the coupon? There's a subtle detail in some of the fight sequences that fans have noticed. Ernie seems to know Peter in a way that goes beyond the coupon incident. He anticipates Peter's moves. He knows Peter's habits. He is never surprised to see Peter. He seems, in fact, prepared, as though he has been waiting. This has led to the theory that the coupon incident was not the first encounter between Peter and Ernie, that they have history going back further, history the show has never depicted, history that perhaps even Peter doesn't remember. The coupon was not the beginning. It was just the moment the war went official. There's also the question of survivability. The fights are genuinely dangerous. People are shot, stabbed, thrown from great heights, crushed under rubble, submerged, run over. Both Peter and Ernie have survived things that should not be survivable. In one fight, Peter is stabbed with a piece of rebar and keeps fighting. In another, both of them survive a building collapse. The physical resilience of both characters during these fights goes far beyond what the show normally allows. Peter, in regular episodes, can be hurt. He bleeds, he bruises, he goes to the hospital. But during the chicken fights, he operates at a different level of durability. This has led fans to speculate that the fights exist in a slightly different layer of reality from the rest of the show, that they're semi-hallucinatory, or that they represent some kind of shared dream state that Peter and Ernie enter together, where the normal rules of the show don't apply. If that's true, it changes everything about what the fights mean. They're not real violence. They're not a real feud. There's something closer to a ritual, a shared experience that both parties need, for reasons that go beyond the expired coupon, for reasons that may have something to do with who they are at their core. Peter Griffin is a man who regularly feels powerless in his marriage, in his workplace, with his children, with the world. The chicken fights are one of the only areas of his life where he is consistently capable, where he matches or exceeds his opponent, where the outcome is uncertain, but where Peter keeps coming back, keeps fighting, keeps surviving. And Ernie the giant chicken, whoever and whatever he really is, keeps showing up to give Peter that. There's something almost touching about that, if you let yourself see it. The fights don't have an ending. The show has never resolved them. Ernie and Peter are presumably still out there somewhere, resting between rounds, waiting for the next coupon incident, the next parking lot, the next moment when their eyes meet and the music shifts and the world around them braces for what's coming. They will fight again. They always fight again. And in a show full of things that reset and repeat and refuse to conclude, the chicken fights are perhaps the purest expression of that eternal loop. Nothing is settled. Nothing is ever quite over. The feud continues because the feud is what they do. Let that idea settle in as the images drift past. Two figures in a parking lot, recognizing each other across the distance, a history between them that neither fully understands. Something old beginning again. The town watches. The town always watches. And the fight goes on. To understand what this kind of recurring, unexplained conflict does to a show's mythology, you have to think about what it means for the audience to carry this knowledge. Viewers of Family Guy who have watched since the beginning carry Ernie the giant chicken in their heads. They know what it means when they see him appear in an episode. They know the music is about to change. They know Peter's afternoon is about to be completely derailed. That anticipation, that sense of, here we go again, is one of the most reliable emotional responses in the show's entire history. It doesn't require setup. It doesn't require context. Ernie appears, and the audience is immediately transported into a specific mode of watching. Very few shows have characters or elements that work this way. It's a kind of shorthand that has been built up over decades, a shared language between the show and its audience. Ernie the Giant Chicken has become, through sheer repetition and commitment, one of the most recognizable elements in animated television. And all of it started with a coupon that was 4 days past its expiration date. Or so the story goes. The show's writers have acknowledged in interviews that the chicken fights are one of the elements they genuinely enjoy producing. Not just because they land comedically, but because they represent a creative freedom, a space in the show where they can do something visually ambitious without needing to justify it narratively. The fights exist because they can exist. Because the show has earned the right, through years of audience trust, to stop everything and give Peter a 5-minute cinematic brawl. This creative freedom is itself a kind of mystery. Most television shows operate under tight constraints. Every scene has to serve the story. Every minute has to justify its existence in terms of character development or plot advancement. Family Guy, in its chicken fight sequences, abandons those constraints entirely. The fights serve the story of nothing. They are pure event. They happen because they happen, and yet they feel completely at home in Quahog. That's the thing. If you dropped a 5-minute hand-to-hand combat sequence into most sitcoms, it would feel alien, jarring, wrong. In Family Guy, it feels inevitable. The town accommodates it. The world bends around it. And when it's over, Quahog returns to whatever it was doing, slightly more damaged than before, without acknowledging that anything unusual occurred. The architecture of the show allows for this. Family Guy has always operated on a principle of tonal flexibility. It can be genuinely emotional and then immediately absurd, can be grounded and then operatically ridiculous, can care deeply about something and then not care at all. The chicken fights are the most extreme expression of this flexibility. They push the show to its most outlandish register and dare the audience to stay with them. And the audience does, every time. There's one more layer to consider here, and it's perhaps the strangest of all. Ernie the Giant Chicken has appeared in episodes where Peter is hallucinating, in dream sequences, in alternate reality storylines. He has appeared in the Road 2 episodes, the multiverse episode, holiday specials. He is not confined to the regular timeline of the show. He exists across dimensions, across timelines, across versions of reality. This ubiquity suggests that Ernie is not just a character in Peter's life, he's something more fundamental than that. A constant, a fixture of whatever universe Peter inhabits. Wherever Peter goes, across whatever version of reality the show visits, the giant chicken is there. That's either a coincidence of writing, or it's the show telling us something that the relationship between Peter Griffin and Ernie the Giant Chicken is not circumstantial. It's structural. It's written into the fabric of Peter's existence. They were always going to find each other, in every timeline, in every version of the world. The coupon was just an excuse. Rest on that thought for a while. The idea that some conflicts are not really about what they seem to be about. That some wars between two people are older than any single incident, that they're about something in the shape of who those people are, something that would have found its way to the surface eventually through one trigger or another. Ernie and Peter were going to fight. The universe knew it. The expired coupon was just the door the universe chose to walk through. There's something almost romantic about that. Two people, one human, one inexplicably a giant chicken in a suit, bound together by something neither of them fully understands, playing out their conflict on the streets of a town that shouldn't exist, in a time that never changes. Again and again and again, Quahog holds them. As it holds everything. We'll come back to Peter. There's much more to discover about him. About his past, his origins, the family line that goes all the way back to colonial New England. But first, let's cross the living room and spend some time with the smallest member of the Griffin household. The one who has been watching all of this from his crib with an expression of profound, slightly unsettling intelligence. Let's talk about Stewie. Section 3. Can anyone actually hear Stewie? There is a question that has lived at the center of Family Guy since its very first episode, unresolved for years, periodically addressed but never quite settled, running under everything like a low current. The question is deceptively simple. When Stewie Griffin talks, who can hear him? Stewie is a year-old baby. He speaks in the clipped, precise accent of a mid-century British actor, perfectly articulated, elaborate in vocabulary, often referencing philosophy, physics, engineering, and geopolitical strategy. He builds time machines in his bedroom. He has constructed a functional teleportation device. He has, on multiple occasions, attempted to take over the world, and his plans for doing so have been genuinely sophisticated. His family, the show sometimes suggests, cannot hear any of this. The confusion starts almost immediately. In the earliest episodes, it appears that Stewie's speech is simply not processed by the adults around him. Lois hears baby sounds, Peter hears baby sounds. When Stewie delivers a monologue about his plans for world domination or his frustration with being served broccoli, the adults in the room respond to what they apparently hear as babbling. But then, and this is where the mystery deepens, sometimes they respond. Not to everything, not consistently, but often enough that you can't write it off as a gag. Lois has referenced something Stewie said. Peter has answered Stewie's questions directly. Other characters have had full conversations with Stewie, as though he's a fully participating member of the dialogue. The inconsistency is not subtle. In some scenes, Stewie says something pointed and devastating to a character who stands 6 feet away from him, and that character gives no indication of having heard it. In the very next scene, the same character might respond to Stewie as though everything he says is perfectly audible. Seth MacFarlane addressed this at a Comic-Con panel in 2012, and his answer was characteristically direct. The show had never decided. The original intention, he said, was that Stewie was not audible to adults, that his entire inner life was invisible, his genius undetected, his murderous ambitions silent. The comedy was supposed to come from this gap. Stewie, inside, is operating at the level of a supervillain. From the outside, he is a baby. But the writers kept finding moments where Stewie needed to be heard, where the story or the joke required someone to respond to him, and they let those moments happen. Over time, the audibility became inconsistent not by design but by accumulation. The show had drifted away from its original premise without formally abandoning it. And then, in 2021, the show attempted to address this head-on. In the season 19 episode Stewie's First Word, the premise is that Stewie, in front of the family, says his first recognizable word. The family is delighted. They celebrate. And the suggestion is that this is genuinely the first time they've understood him, that everything before this was either unhearing on their part or, in some cases, the show operating in a kind of subjective mode where we're seeing Stewie's inner experience rather than literal events. This is an elegant solution, and it retroactively makes sense of a lot of the show's history. If many of Stewie's most elaborate conversations happened in a subjective register, if they're what Stewie experiences rather than what literally occurs, then the scenes where adults don't hear him aren't failures of continuity. They're the realistic scenes. The ones where he talks and nobody responds are the truth. The ones where he has full conversations with adults are the fantasy Stewie imagining being heard. But this solution creates new problems. Because some of the scenes where Stewie is heard by adults are too specific, too consequential, too plot-driven to be fantasy. Stewie has traveled with Brian. Brian has carried him across multiple continents. They've had conversations in moving vehicles, in foreign countries, in emotional situations where the dialogue mattered deeply to the story. Is all of that Stewie's imagination? That seems like a lot of imagining. And what about Brian? Brian is the character most consistently depicted as hearing and understanding Stewie. Their relationship is the emotional core of the show, in many respects a friendship between a baby and a dog that is, somehow, the most adult and mutually respectful relationship in the entire Griffin household. They talk, they debate, they support each other. They've expressed genuine love and concern for each other in moments that the show played entirely straight. If Stewie can't be heard, Brian is the exception. Brian hears him. Why? What makes Brian different? The most common fan explanation is that Brian, as a dog with an elevated intellect, perceives the world differently from the human characters. Dogs' hearing is more acute. Their sensitivity to subtlety and nuance is different. Perhaps Brian hears in Stewie something that the human's cognitive filters strip out. Not just the words, but the frequency, the signal beneath the baby sounds that adults tune out because their brains have categorized it as non-language. There's something beautiful in this theory. The idea that dogs hear what humans can't. That Brian's particular sensitivity, his intelligence, his emotional awareness, his outsider position in the family, allows him to perceive a child that everyone else, with all their busyness and adult certainty, simply misses. It also explains why their friendship is what it is. They are both perceived incompletely by the world around them. Brian is a dog, and despite his obvious intelligence and emotional depth, the humans in his life treat him as a pet, sometimes fully, sometimes not, depending on the moment. Stewie is a baby, and despite the supercomputer running behind his eyes, the humans treat him as an infant who needs to be fed and changed and kept safe. They are the two most underestimated beings in the Griffin house, and they have found each other because of it. The idea of a genius baby is, on its surface, comedic. But Stewie's inner life, as the show has developed it over the years, is genuinely complex. He has desires and fears and insecurities that track in ways that make emotional sense. His early obsession with killing Lois, the dominant characteristic of the first few seasons, is almost universally understood by longtime fans as expressing an infant's frustration with dependency. Stewie can't choose anything. Lois controls everything: his food, his schedule, his environment, his freedom. The murderous impulses are exaggerated, operatic expressions of a very real developmental experience. The infant who wants autonomy and has almost none. As the show progressed and Stewie's character softened, gradually shifting from aspiring supervillain to something more like a deeply unusual but fundamentally good child, his relationship with Lois evolved too. The murderous plots became less frequent, then became rare, then became jokes about how rare they'd become. Something changed in Stewie. He grew up, in the ways the show's frozen timeline allowed. What didn't change was the audibility question. There are episodes, entire storylines built around Stewie being completely unheard. Quagmire's Baby features a sequence where Stewie is desperately trying to communicate something to the adults around him and is ignored. The episode plays this both for laughs and for something that feels genuinely uncomfortable, a child screaming to be noticed by people who can't register what he's saying. And then there are episodes where Stewie participates fully in adult conversations, has opinions that are acknowledged, makes decisions that other characters factor in. The show holds both realities simultaneously. Maybe that's the honest answer. Maybe Quahog is a place where both things are true, where Stewie is both heard and unheard, depending on what the story needs, depending on who is in the room, depending on something ineffable about the moment. Reality in Quahog is not fixed. It bends. The rules are guidelines. The truth is approximate. And Stewie, sitting in his crib or his high chair, or behind the wheel of whatever vehicle he's borrowed for the afternoon, continues to talk, continues to plan, continues to build devices that shouldn't be possible, and form theories about the nature of the universe. Whether anyone is listening or not, there's a melancholy to that, if you sit with it. The most intelligent person in any room he enters, completely overlooked. The most ambitious character in the show, confined to a crib. All that interiority, all that complexity, all that language, and the world responding most of the time with the patient incomprehension it gives to babies. Stewie talks. The world turns. And somewhere in the gap between those two things, a friendship grows between a baby genius and a dog who drinks too much and reads too little, the two of them finding in each other the witness the rest of the world refuses to be. Let the image of them together be the one you rest on. Brian and Stewie, side by side on the sofa. A book between them, or a TV show they're watching, or a quiet argument about something philosophical. The house moving around them. The family doing whatever families do. And those two, just there, present to each other in a way that nobody else in the house manages to be. Something real in the middle of all the strangeness. That's Quahog, too. That's always been Quahog. There's another dimension to the Stewie audibility question that doesn't get discussed as often, but which matters a great deal to the overall texture of the show. It's the question of what it means for Stewie that he is, functionally, invisible. Think about the implications of a world where your most genuine self, your real thoughts, your actual intelligence, your true personality goes unregistered by almost everyone around you. You are performing a version of yourself for the world, not by choice but by circumstance. The version the world sees is not the version you are. And the only person who sees you, really sees you, is one friend who happens to also be living in a misunderstood category. This maps onto something real. It maps onto the experience of people who feel fundamentally unseen, whose depth is dismissed, whose intelligence is underestimated, whose interior life is more complex than the world around them credits. Stewie is a comedic exaggeration of a feeling that a lot of people carry. The sense that who you really are is not the person anyone around you actually perceives. And the show, perhaps accidentally, perhaps intentionally, uses this feeling to generate some of its most quietly affecting moments. When Stewie is despairing. When Stewie is lonely. When Stewie does something extraordinary and nobody notices. There's a note in those scenes that goes beyond the joke, a frequency that resonates with the part of any audience member who has ever felt like the most complicated person in a room full of people who couldn't tell. Brian tells him, sometimes, in the best episodes, I see you, I hear you, you matter to me. And Stewie, who has built weapons capable of ending civilizations, who has traveled through time and visited alternate realities, who has designed machines that physicists would weep over Stewie, in those moments, is just a kid who needed to be heard. The mystery of Stewie's audibility is At its deepest level, a mystery about visibility, about what it means to be known, about whether it's possible to truly understand another person when so much of what makes them who they are remains invisible to the naked eye. Quahog doesn't resolve that question. Nothing does. But it asks it, quietly, in the background of every scene where Stewie speaks and nobody turns their head. We hear you, Stewie, even if no one else does. There's a specific episode that brings the audibility question to the surface in the most formally interesting way, and it's an episode that many casual viewers might not remember, but that rewards close attention. In the Season 3 episode A Mission Impossible, Lois discovers she is pregnant again. Peter is terrified of having another baby. And the episode spends a significant amount of time inside Lois's womb, where Stewie attempts to prevent his potential sibling from being conceived. Inside the womb, Stewie interacts with a representation of the potential new sibling. The sequence is fully realized in the show's visual vocabulary. Stewie moves through a biological landscape rendered with the show's particular mix of accuracy and absurdity, conversing with not quite formed life, negotiating the terms of his family's future. The episode is funny, obviously, and the premise is used primarily for comedy. But what it demonstrates structurally is that the show's perspective on Stewie's inner world is not limited by what other characters can perceive. The show goes places that no character witnesses. It shows us Stewie's reality from the inside, from a perspective that only the audience shares. This suggests something about the show's contract with the viewer when it comes to Stewie. We are his witnesses. We are the only ones who see everything he does and hear everything he says. The other characters are partly blind to him, partly deaf. But the audience has full access. The audience is Stewie's confidant, the constant, silent presence that receives every monologue, every scheme, every moment of vulnerability. This is an intimate position to be in. It creates a relationship between Stewie and the viewer that is unlike any other relationship in the show. The other characters are his neighbors, his family, his occasional companions. The audience is his diary. The one place where Stewie Griffin, genius baby, supervillain in miniature, lonely person in the most exact sense, is fully heard. And maybe that's why people love him. Not because his plans are interesting or his accent is funny, though both are true, but because he trusts us with himself. He keeps nothing back, not for us. Every scheme, every fear, every flash of longing for something different, it's all for the audience. Only for the audience. Always for the audience. In a show full of characters who hide from each other, Stewie hides from no one but us. That's a gift. And the gift is in the silence of everyone else, in the world that doesn't hear him, because their deafness is what makes the communication between Stewie and the viewer so specific, so exclusive, so real. We are the only ones who know the whole Stewie, and Stewie in his way knows that. He speaks to us accordingly, with everything he has, holding nothing back. Thank you for listening, Stewie would say, if Stewie were capable of gratitude without irony. And then he'd probably ruin it with a British insult. But the thank you would be there, underneath, where the real things are, where all the real things in Quahog are. Section 4, Brian Griffin. The novel, the lies, the longing. Brian Griffin has been working on his novel for as long as the show has existed. This is not a small claim. Family Guy premiered in January 1999. For over 2 decades, across more than 400 episodes, Brian has been in the process of writing a novel that he has never finished, never published in any meaningful way, and never stopped talking about. The novel is called Faster Than the Speed of Love. In the few glimpses the show has given us of its contents, it appears to be a story about a young man who can fly. The writing samples the audience has been shown are not good. They are described by other characters, and by the show itself, as derivative, overwrought, and painfully earnest in ways that make the earnestness itself part of the problem. But Brian keeps writing it, or keeps meaning to write it, or keeps referencing it as something he is in the process of writing while sitting on the sofa drinking a martini and not writing it. The novel is the single most revealing element of Brian Griffin's character. Not because of what it says, we've barely seen what it says, but because of what it represents. Brian's relationship with the novel is a relationship with a version of himself that he cannot quite reach. The Brian Griffin who finishes Faster Than the Speed of Love, who publishes it, who is taken seriously as a literary voice that Brian exists just around the corner, always nearly accessible, perpetually delayed. And the space between who Brian is and who that other Brian would be is the space where all of Brian's sadness lives. In the early seasons of the show, the novel was a gentle running joke. Brian has been working on it forever, haha. The comedy was soft and affectionate, the kind of gentle ribbing that friends give each other about projects that have been almost done for years. There was sympathy in it. Most people, watching Brian sit down to work and then get up again after 30 seconds, recognize something. The distance between wanting to create and actually creating is one of the most universal human experiences there is. As the show continued, the joke darkened. The novel became less of an endearing quirk and more of a symbol of Brian's self-delusion. His claims to be a great writer are increasingly not matched by evidence. He talks about literature, quotes writers, adopts poses of intellectual authority, but the actual work, the thing he produces, is ordinary at best. The most important episode in Brian's literary history is the Season 9 episode Brian Writes a Bestseller, which aired in 2010. In this episode, Stewie pushes Brian to actually write something and get it published. Brian responds by writing a self-help book called Wish It, Want It, Do It. The kind of motivational fluff that he, as a supposed intellectual, would normally hold in contempt. The book becomes a massive commercial success. Brian becomes famous. And then the episode shows us, with brutal clarity, what that success does to him. He becomes monstrous, arrogant beyond any justification, cruel to the people who supported him. He appears on Real Time with Bill Maher and is so insufferable that even the audience, who has been rooting for Brian's success, finds him unbearable. The episode makes a specific and ungenerous argument that Brian, given success, is not ennobled by it. That the humility he sometimes displays when struggling was not genuine humility, but simply the posture of someone who hadn't yet been given the opportunity to be terrible. But here's the thing that makes this more complicated. Brian never published Faster Than the Speed of Love. He published a self-help book. He achieved commercial success with something he didn't value. The Brian who is celebrated in Brian Writes a Bestseller is not the Brian who has been dreaming about literary recognition for years. He's a version of Brian who found a shortcut, who discovered that the market doesn't care about the novel he actually wants to write. And when that version of Brian is celebrated, he falls apart. Because the celebration isn't for the thing that matters. This is not a small distinction. It's the psychological core of Brian's character, and the show often accidentally, sometimes intentionally, keeps circling back to it. Brian wants to be recognized for something specific, for his mind, for his sensitivity, for his ability to render the world in language that makes it more visible. He wants the novel to mean something, and every time he gets something else, commercial success, social status, temporary celebrity, it doesn't fill the hole, because the hole is not shaped like success. It's shaped like being truly seen. The drinking is part of this portrait too. Brian drinks throughout the show, martinis in the evening, wine at dinner, sometimes more than that. The drinking is played for laughs mostly, but it's drawn with enough consistency to suggest it's not just a character quirk, it's management. Brian manages the distance between who he is and who he wants to be with alcohol. The way a lot of people manage a lot of things. Not dramatically, not catastrophically, but steadily, habitual, with the glass always slightly too full. The show has, in its better episodes, acknowledged this. The Season 8 episode Brian and Stewie, one of the most praised episodes in the show's history, features Brian revealing to Stewie that he keeps a gun in a safety deposit box. He's thought about using it. He's not sure he won't. Stewie's response to this is one of the show's most emotionally honest moments. He tells Brian that if Brian died, it would matter to him in a way nothing else matters. That Brian is the one person in his world who makes the world feel worthwhile. It's remarkable television, and it works precisely because of everything the show has built around Brian, all the years of the unfinished novel, the self-mythologizing, the distance between the Brian who exists and the Brian he imagines. That distance, when the show finally makes it explicit, is genuinely heartbreaking. Brian's novel has never been finished in the show's canon, but there are fans who have spent considerable time analyzing the title Faster Than the Speed of Love and what it might actually be about, based on the scraps of information the show has provided. The protagonist can fly. He moves faster than he should be able to. He is described as experiencing a kind of freedom that other people can't access. It's hard not to read this as autobiographical. Brian Griffin, for all his self-delusion, is not unintelligent. He knows what he is. And what he is, at the core, is someone who feels trapped in a category that can't contain him. A dog in a human world, with human feelings and human dreams that the world's filing system has no drawer for. He talks like a person. He thinks like a person. He wants what people want. But he will never fully be what he needs to be, because the category was set at birth, and categories in Quahog are almost impossible to escape. Faster than the speed of love. A man who flies. Who moves too fast for the things that hold people in place? That's Brian's dream, compressed into a title. The dream of escaping the gravity of what you are, of moving so fast that the limitations can't keep up. The novel remains unfinished. In a show where nothing ever permanently changes, that may be its most honest feature. It can't be finished, because finishing it would resolve something that the show needs to keep open. Brian's longing is part of what keeps him human. Part of what makes him the character who most consistently generates real feeling in audiences who would otherwise watch the show at a remove. He keeps writing. He keeps not finishing. He keeps telling people he's working on it. And somewhere in the distance, in the version of Brian that exists just around the corner, the last page is being typed. Let the sound of a typewriter carry you forward. The late-night click of keys in a house that's gone quiet. Brian at the desk in the living room with a fresh martini and 3 sentences he'll cross out by morning. The novel goes on. So does the night. One last thing about Brian and his writing, because it matters to the larger picture. In the episode where Brian publishes Wish It, Want It, Do It, there's a specific detail that is easy to miss but which fans have flagged repeatedly. When Brian is riding high on his commercial success, he encounters a writer he respects, someone who represents the kind of literary legitimacy he's always wanted. That writer dismisses Brian's self-help book immediately, with contempt. The kind of contempt that suggests they would have dismissed anything Brian wrote with similar ease. Brian is devastated, not because the criticism is unfair, it isn't, particularly, but because it reveals that even if he had published the novel, even if Faster Than the Speed of Love had somehow found its way into print, the gatekeepers of the literary world would likely have dismissed that too. The problem isn't the book Brian wrote. The problem is who Brian is in the eyes of the world that assigns literary worth. And no amount of writing will change that. This is the darkest reading of Brian's storyline. And the show doesn't fully commit to it, but it's there, in the subtext, for those who look. Brian's dream may not be achievable regardless of the work, and he knows it. And he pours another drink. Quahog keeps its wounds quiet. This one is no different. There's a companion mystery to Brian's novel that doesn't get discussed as often, but is equally intriguing. The question of Brian's son, Dylan. In the Season 6 episode The Former Life of Brian, it is revealed that Brian has a teenage son named Dylan, the result of a relationship he had years before the show's timeline begins. Dylan's mother, Tracy, raised him alone. Brian was not present. When Dylan shows up in Quahog, Brian attempts to be a father awkwardly, with all the emotional clumsiness you'd expect from someone whose primary relationship with parenting has been as an observer of Peter Griffin's failures. The episode ends with Dylan choosing to go back to his mother and her new husband, who has been a consistent and loving presence in his life. Brian, despite his efforts, is not what Dylan needs. This conclusion is handled with surprising gentleness, and the episode is generally considered one of the more emotionally coherent later season episodes. But Dylan essentially vanishes after this. He's mentioned occasionally, referenced when the plot requires it, but he's not a consistent presence in Brian's life. For a character whose arc is defined by unfulfilled longing for literary recognition, for connection, for a life that matches the one he imagines the abandoned son, is a significant absence. Dylan represents the most concrete failure in Brian's history. Not the unfinished novel, not the failed relationships with women, but a child he wasn't there for. The show doesn't return to this as much as it probably should. Fans have noted that Dylan's existence complicates the portrait of Brian in ways the show finds easier to leave unexplored. A Brian who acknowledges his failure as a father is a harder character to redeem in the crowd-pleasing ways the show prefers. So Dylan sits in the background, occasionally referenced, never quite resolved. This is another of Quahog's quiet wounds. The things that happened, acknowledged but not processed, filed under things we don't talk about anymore. Brian has a son. Brian wasn't there. Brian keeps pouring martinis and adding to the unfinished novel. The town holds all of it. without judgment, without resolution. And in some house, in some street we've never seen, Dylan exists, growing up, living his life, probably fine, probably not thinking about Brian at all, or maybe thinking about him every day in the way that kids whose fathers didn't show up think about those fathers, not with consuming rage, but with a background question that never quite goes away. Why wasn't I enough? Brian, if he could hear that question, and maybe he can, maybe it's part of why the drinking never quite stops, doesn't have an answer that satisfies either of them. The novel remains unfinished. The sun remains at a distance. The martini glass stays full. That's Brian. That's the character underneath the character. And it's the reason that when the show gets Brian right, genuinely right, in the best episodes, there's nobody on the show who cuts closer to the bone. Let the warmth of that recognition settle around you as we move through the house. Out of the living room, down the hall, away from Brian's desk and toward the kitchen, where Peter Griffin is probably doing something that will require explaining later. Peter's mysteries are different from Brian's. Where Brian's secrets are interior psychological, emotional, buried Peter's are historical. They live in his past, in a family tree that gets stranger the further back you go. Let's follow that tree. Let's take one more pass through Brian's literary world, because there's a dimension to it that connects to the show's own history in ways that are easy to overlook. In the years when the show was at its creative peak, seasons 1 through 3, before the cancellations and the revival changed the texture of everything, Brian was depicted as genuinely struggling. His writing ambitions were present and treated seriously within the show's comedic register. He was a writer who hadn't succeeded yet. The word yet was implicit. It felt like it was coming. After the revival, something shifted. The yet started feeling less certain. Brian's writing failures became longer running, more established, more part of his permanent condition. He was no longer a writer who hadn't succeeded yet. He was a writer who hadn't succeeded. The difference in that small word is enormous. This shift mirrors something that happened to the show itself. The early Family Guy, confident, energetic, full of the specificity that comes from someone who has something to prove, was a show that hadn't yet established itself, and that urgency is written into every frame. The later show is different. It has proven itself, it is secure, and with security came, in some episodes, a loosening, a willingness to coast, a relationship with the audience that could afford to be more transactional. Brian's stalling novel is the show's stalling ambition, reflected in miniature. Both were reaching towards something in the beginning. Both found reasons to stop reaching. Both settled into a version of themselves that is comfortable, but that isn't the best version. This is not a condemnation. It's just an observation about what happens when the pressure of becoming something is replaced by the comfort of already being something. The creative spark that ignites from necessity doesn't survive prosperity the same way. The hunger that produces great early work is genuinely hard to maintain when the hunger is satisfied. Brian's novel can't be finished because finishing it would require Brian to be something other than what he currently is. It would require the conditions of his early ambition, the uncertainty, the striving, the sense that everything is still possible to reassert themselves, and those conditions are gone. Brian is secure in the Griffin household. He is loved after his fashion. He is settled. The novel is the last place where Brian is still becoming. While it remains unfinished, he is still a writer. Once it's done, he'd be a writer who wrote one novel, and one novel can be judged, can be found wanting, can be the end of the story. Unfinished, it's still the beginning of a story that hasn't yet delivered its verdict. Brian keeps it unfinished because an unfinished novel is infinite potential. A finished one is just a book. That's not cowardice exactly. It's a kind of hope. The hope that what hasn't been tried yet might still be everything. The dog at the desk, late at night, adding one more sentence and then closing the laptop. Still writing, still becoming, still hoping. That's Brian. That's always been Brian. And now, the house at 31 Spooner Street. The structure itself, the impossible building where all of this takes place. Let's go inside. Section 5. Peter Griffin's Real Past. Peter Griffin presents himself to the world as a simple man. He loves beer, he loves television, he loves his family, imperfectly and loudly. He has opinions about things he doesn't understand, and he shares those opinions without hesitation. He worked at the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory for years before eventually landing at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, and the brewery is such a perfect fit for Peter that it's hard to imagine him anywhere else. A man who loves beer, working in a place that makes beer. It's the kind of tidy biographical alignment that makes you think the universe occasionally gets it right. But Peter Griffin's past is not simple. It is not tidy. And the deeper you dig into where Peter came from, the stranger his origins become. Start with his name. Peter's full legal name, as established in the episode Padre de Familia in Season 6, is Peter Löwenbräu Griffin. The middle name is a German beer brand, which Peter chose himself in adulthood as a tribute to his love of beer, which tells you everything and nothing. His legal surname is Griffin. This seems straightforward. It is not. The Griffin family name, in the show's mythology, traces back to colonial America. The ancestor the show has most explicitly depicted is Nate Griffin, a black enslaved man who lived in the colonial period and whose relationship with a white woman named Lois forms part of the origin of the Griffin family line. This storyline, depicted in the Season 6 episode Peter's Two Dads and the Season 7 episode We Love You, Conrad attempts to give Peter a family history with real depth and real complexity. It connects the Griffin household to the foundational violence and injustice of American history in a way that most animated comedies wouldn't attempt. But here's where things become genuinely strange. Peter Griffin is not the biological son of the man he grew up calling his father. This is revealed in the Season 7 episode Peter's Two Dads. Peter's mother, Thelma Griffin, reveals that Peter's biological father is not Francis Griffin the Stern, religious Irish Catholic man Peter feared and respected throughout his childhood, but rather a man named Mickey McFinnigan, an Irish drifter who had a relationship with Thelma before she married Francis. Mickey McFinnigan is, in almost every way, a male version of Peter. He drinks heavily, he's loud and impulsive, he makes spectacularly bad decisions with great confidence. He lives in a small town in Ireland and is, apparently, something of a local legend in terms of both his drinking capacity and his general disreputability. When Peter meets him, the resemblance is immediate and undeniable, not just physical but behavioral. Mickey is who Peter would be if Peter had never had a family to temper him, however slightly. The revelation that Francis Griffin was not Peter's biological father is one of those pieces of Family Guy backstory that recontextualizes a significant amount of what came before. Francis Griffin was hard on Peter throughout the episodes where he appeared. He was critical, withholding, difficult. The audience assumed this was simply the dynamic of a stern religious father and an imperfect son. But if Francis knew or suspected that Peter wasn't his biological child, then the harshness takes on an additional dimension. Not just a father who found his son disappointing, but a man who resented, perhaps, the evidence of his wife's infidelity. The show doesn't fully explore this interpretation, but the material is there for it. And fans who have gone back through Francis's appearances with this knowledge report that his behavior reads differently. The coldness has a context. There's also the matter of where Peter was born. In the Season 6 episode Padre de Familia, it's revealed that Peter was born in Mexico, not America. His mother was traveling when she gave birth, and the birth took place on Mexican soil, which, under certain legal interpretations, would make Peter a Mexican citizen rather than an American citizen. The episode uses this discovery as the basis for an immigration story. Peter is at risk of deportation, but it also raises a question that the show never fully answers. Does Peter know this? Did he know it growing up? How much of Peter's identity as a New England working-class American is built on an origin he was never aware of? Peter's family history is a document of displacement. A colonial ancestor who was enslaved, a biological father he never knew, a birth on foreign soil. The man who sits in the recliner at 31 Spooner Street, untroubled and unquestioning, is sitting on top of a history that should, by rights, have made him someone very different. Maybe it did. Maybe the lightness with which Peter moves through the world, his refusal to be weighed down, his resilience in the face of consequences that would level most people, is not stupidity. Maybe it's the result of a deep, inarticulate decision to not look down, to not examine the foundation. Because the foundation, if examined, would be too much. This reading makes Peter more interesting. Not smarter, not more admirable, but more understandable. His blankness is a kind of armor. Now let's go deeper into the family tree, because there's another Griffin ancestor who rarely gets mentioned, but who adds another layer to Peter's complicated inheritance. In the Season 4 episode, Don't Make Me Over, A version of the show's history is briefly glimpsed, and in various other episodes, the Griffin family's lineage has been touched upon through cutaways and flashbacks. The show has depicted Peter's ancestors in various historical periods: the colonial era, the World War II era, the 1970s. In each depiction, the Griffin men share Peter's basic shape: large, impulsive, not particularly thoughtful, but possessed of a certain blundering durability that keeps them moving forward regardless of what the world throws at them. There's a theory among dedicated fans that the Griffin men across all the historical periods the show has depicted share not just physical and behavioral traits, but something more specific: a relationship with consequence that is functionally different from how consequence works for everyone else. Things happen to Griffin men: terrible, absurd, catastrophic things. And they continue. The history doesn't accumulate. The damage doesn't compound. Each Griffin wakes up the next day approximately the same as he was. This is, of course, a description of how animated sitcom characters work. But in the context of Family Guy's mythology, it's also a description of something almost magical about the Griffin line, a resilience that borders on the supernatural. Stewie has the time machine. Brian has the intelligence. But Peter has something else: the ability to simply not be defeated by what would defeat anyone else. He falls from great heights and gets up. He loses jobs and finds others. He ruins things and they get fixed. He is, in the show's cosmology, almost indestructible, not through physical toughness, though there's plenty of that, but through a fundamental constitutional resistance to being permanently harmed by his own life. Is that inherited? The show suggests it might be. Francis Griffin, whatever his emotional failings, was similarly durable. He was a difficult man who lived a full life and imposed himself on the world around him without apology until the end. Mickey McFinnigan, Peter's biological father, is depicted as someone who has survived decades of catastrophic decision-making with nothing more to show for it than a good story and a full glass. The Griffin men endure. It seems to be the family's one consistent trait. And then there's this. In the show's floating timeline, Peter has apparently been roughly 42 years old since the late 1990s. He was born, according to various pieces of established backstory, sometime in the mid-1960s. He grew up in the 1970s and 1980s. He met Lois in college and married her young. These dates and the floating present of the show don't add up cleanly. They can't, because the show's timeline is designed to not add up cleanly. But the attempt to establish Peter's biographical history creates an interesting artifact: a man whose personal history is rooted in a specific era, but who never ages out of it. Peter is, in some sense, a child of the 1970s and 1980s who will never stop being one. His references, his sensibilities, his idea of what a man is supposed to be, all of it is calibrated to an era that the show simultaneously inhabits and has left behind. He is always contemporary and always slightly out of time. That quality of being a man from a specific moment who never has to reckon with the passage of that moment might be the most mysterious thing about Peter Griffin. He is not nostalgic, exactly. Nostalgia requires knowing that something is past. Peter lives in his era the way a fish lives in water, without noticing it. The past he came from, complicated as it is, doesn't touch him. It just made him, and somewhere in Mexico, on a date that doesn't quite add up, Peter Lowenbroy Griffin took his first breath, and the world became, irreversibly, stranger. Sleep on that thought. A man whose origins are a tangle of immigration, illegitimacy, colonial history, and biological mystery, sitting in a recliner watching television without a care in the world. Sometimes the most interesting people are the ones who don't know they're interesting. Peter Griffin doesn't know. He will never know. And the house keeps turning around him, full of people who know exactly how complicated everything is. The mystery of Peter's biological father becomes more resonant when you think about what it means for Peter's relationship with Chris, Meg, and Stewie. Peter is, in some ways, doing to his children what was done to him, being emotionally inconsistent, present in body but unreliable in spirit, capable of warmth and capable of damage in equal measure. The cycle of imperfect fathering, the show seems to suggest, runs through the Griffin bloodline like a current. But it's not a story of inevitable repetition. It's a story of imperfect people doing what they can with what they have. Francis Griffin was hard on Peter. Peter is inconsistent with his children. But the children, in their various ways, are working out their own versions of what it means to be a Griffin. Meg with her fierce resilience, Chris with his gentle oddness, Stewie with his extraordinary inner world. The Griffin family is not a model. It's a study, a close, complicated, sometimes uncomfortable examination of what happens when a group of people are bound together by blood and proximity and forced to make something of it. And Peter, at the center of it, the man who doesn't know his own past, who was born in a country he's never acknowledged, who carries the name of a man who may have resented him. Peter keeps the whole thing moving, not gracefully, not wisely, but with an energy that, whatever its faults, never quite stops. That's something, in Quahog. In a town where everything resets and nothing permanently changes, the sheer forward motion of Peter Griffin is its own kind of miracle. He keeps going. He always keeps going. And the mysteries keep accumulating behind him, like a wake. Let's walk up the stairs now, past the kitchen, past the hallway photographs, up to where Meg's door is almost certainly closed. Because the next mystery isn't about where this family came from. It's about how one specific member of it is treated and what that treatment reveals about the show, and about the world the show is making, and about the character who has had to survive inside it. Meg Griffin deserves to be looked at clearly. The show has not always done that. Tonight we will. There is one more piece of Peter's history that sits outside all the others, and that is, in its way, the most emotionally revealing thing the show has given us about him. In the Season 4 episode, The Cleveland Loretta Quagmire, Peter behaves in a way that's wrong. He enables something destructive and doesn't take responsibility. At the end of the episode, he sits alone with Brian, and Brian asks him why he keeps doing things that hurt the people he loves. Peter's response is quiet and surprisingly undefended. He says he doesn't know. He says he wishes he were different. He says that sometimes he sees himself from the outside, and he doesn't understand the person he's looking at. It's a brief exchange. The show moves past it quickly. But it's the most honest moment Peter Griffin has in the entire run of the series about himself. The man who never seems to recognize his own damage, who appears immune to self-reflection, sitting quietly in the dark and admitting, I don't understand myself. I don't know why I am the way I am. This is not the Peter of most episodes, but it is a Peter, a real one, underneath the performance. A man who carries a history he doesn't fully know, born in a country he's never claimed, raised by a man who may not have wanted him, descended from an ancestor whose suffering predates this country, and who has never had the tools or the language or the space to process any of it. Peter's jokes are the sound of someone not processing. His noise is the sound of someone not sitting still long enough to feel the weight of what he is carrying. His relentless forward motion, always doing something, always causing something, never stopping, is the motion of a man who knows, without knowing he knows it, that if he stops, the weight will be there. The beer helps. The television helps. The friends help. The bar helps. And Lois helps most of all. Lois, who knows what Peter is, who sees the damage and the potential and the fundamental decency underneath both, and who stays. Not out of resignation. Out of something that the show, in its better moments, treats with the seriousness it deserves. Love that has looked at the complete picture and chosen to remain. Peter Griffin is a mystery, not because his past is complicated, though it is, but because he contains, without reconciling, the full range of what a person can be. He is capable of tremendous cruelty and genuine tenderness. He is capable of profound stupidity and surprising insight. He is a man whose history runs from colonial Rhode Island to Mexico to an Irish bar, and who sits, every week, in a recliner in front of a television, apparently untroubled by any of it. Maybe that's peace. Maybe that's damage. Maybe it's both. In Quahog, those two things are hard to separate. Let Peter be large and loud and imperfect, and somewhere in there, deep and quiet, trying. He's always trying. The history behind him is enormous. The man in front of it is smaller than it. But he shows up, every week, to the life he's been given. That's something. In Quahog, that's enough. Section 6. The Meg Griffin Conspiracy. Meg Griffin has the worst deal in animated television. This is not a controversial statement among people who have watched the show. It's closer to a consensus. For roughly 10 seasons, beginning in earnest around Season 4 and reaching its most extreme expressions somewhere around Seasons 8 through 12, Meg was the target of sustained, escalating, often genuinely uncomfortable abuse from her own family. Her father made cruelty toward her a running joke. Her mother's patience ran thin in ways it never did with the other children. Her brothers, both of them, in their very different ways, treated her with a casual contempt that the show consistently framed as comedy. And here is the thing that makes Meg's situation not just sad, but genuinely mysterious. The show knows it's wrong. It has always known it's wrong, and it has never been able to stop. The evidence that the show knows it's wrong is embedded in the show itself. Multiple episodes have characters explicitly acknowledging that Meg is mistreated and that this mistreatment has consequences. The Season 10 episode Seahorse Seashell Party, widely considered one of the most controversial in the show's history, builds an entire story around Meg finally confronting her family with the truth of how they've treated her. Her speech to Peter is specific and accurate. It catalogs real things he has done. It's not a dramatic exaggeration from a sensitive teenager. It's a factual account. And what happens next is the mystery at the center of Meg's entire storyline. After her confrontation, after the family, without her to absorb their collective dysfunction, begins turning on each other, Meg goes to Brian, and she takes it all back. She accepts with a kind of resigned clarity that her role in the family is to be the absorber, the one who takes the damage so no one else has to. She says, in effect, I know what I am here. I know what this family needs from me. And she goes back to it. The episode frames this as a choice. Meg makes a choice. And it is, in the context of the show's internal logic, a coherent choice. Without Meg to serve as the family's shared target, the system breaks down. The Griffins, it turns out, need someone to be below them, someone whose struggles make their own manageable, someone whose presence allows them to feel, however unconsciously, that there is a lower rung on the ladder. This is a dark piece of social commentary, whether the writers intended it as such or not. The idea that certain families, maybe all families, in some version of this require a scapegoat to function, that the scapegoat role, terrible as it is, serves a purpose. That removing the scapegoat doesn't heal the family, it simply relocates the damage. Fans have spent years arguing about what to make of this. Some see it as the show being genuinely insightful about family dynamics, using the extreme case of the Griffins to illuminate something real about how cruelty functions in closed systems. Others see it as the show rationalizing its own worst impulses, using a pseudo-psychological framework to justify continuing to treat Meg badly. Both readings are valid. They can coexist. But the mystery goes further than the Seahorse Seashell episode. The mystery is this: who is Meg Griffin, actually? Not as the family's punching bag, but as a person? The show has, scattered across its run, given us glimpses. Meg is an excellent saxophone player. This is established in the Season 13 crossover with The Simpsons, where Lisa Simpson encourages her to develop this talent. Meg is physically tough in several later episodes. She is depicted as remarkably capable of taking and delivering damage, and this becomes a source of unexpected comedic power. Meg has shown herself to be genuinely caring and perceptive, capable of seeing people clearly in ways the rest of her family can't. There are fan theories, and these have circulated widely enough to have been discussed in mainstream entertainment media, that argue Meg is the most emotionally healthy person in the Griffin household. That she is, in fact, the only one who consistently tries to connect with people, who wants real relationships, who reaches out toward others rather than away. Her tragedy, in this reading, is not that she's lesser than her family, but that she's better, more emotionally developed, more genuinely empathetic, and this quality makes her the most threatening presence in a household built on avoidance and deflection. A family that operates by not feeling its own feelings needs someone to feel things for it, and Meg feels everything. She is the household's emotional nerve. Every insult lands on her because she is, of all of them, the only one fully present enough to be hurt. This theory is painful in a way that makes it feel true. The idea that sensitivity is punished, that the capacity for feeling is treated as weakness, that in a family full of people managing their inner lives through noise and performance and avoidance, the one person who doesn't manage, who just sits there, exposed, permeable, hurting, becomes the target, not in spite of her sensitivity, but because of it. There is a specific piece of continuity that supports this reading, and it comes from the episode Meg Stinks in Season 12. In this episode, there is a moment, brief, quiet, easy to miss, where Peter is driving alone, and he has a thought about Meg that is genuinely affectionate. He thinks about a time she did something sweet when she was small. The thought passes. He returns to whatever he was doing. The scene is played entirely straight with no punchline. This moment is important because it confirms what the show otherwise works hard to suppress. Peter loves Meg. Not well, not consistently, not in any way that protects her. But the feeling is there, underneath the damage. He loves her in the broken, unprocessed way of a man who was raised without a model for how to express love, who has never developed the emotional vocabulary for it, and who therefore expresses the opposite of what he feels because the opposite is easier. That's not a defense of Peter's behavior. It's an explanation that makes the behavior more tragic. The Meg mystery, finally, is about what it means to be the person in a family who holds the truth. Meg knows the Griffins better than they know themselves. She knows what they are. The confrontation in Seahorse Seashell Party demonstrates this. She sees clearly, she articulates clearly, she understands the machinery of the family's dysfunction with a precision that should be devastating. And then she goes back to her room and closes the door and absorbs it again. There's a quiet heroism in that, if you look at it a certain way. Not the heroism of triumph or rescue, but the heroism of endurance, of choosing, again and again, to stay in a situation that would break most people, because the alternative, the family fracturing, the people she loves being alone, seems worse. Meg Griffin is not a victim who doesn't know she's a victim. She is a person who has looked at her situation clearly, understood the cost, and decided to pay it. Whether that's nobility or tragedy or both is something the show has never resolved. Maybe it can't be resolved. Maybe it's just true, the way a lot of real things are. Too complicated for a single frame, too painful for a punchline, too honest for easy comfort. The door to Meg's room is closed. It's almost always closed. But behind it, Meg Griffin knows exactly who she is. And maybe that's enough. For tonight, let it be enough. Breathe with her. Let the door be closed. Let the room be quiet. She's fine. She's always fine. She just needs a minute. We all need a minute. Take yours now, as we float downward through the house, past the kitchen, past the living room, into the structure of the building itself, which has its own mysteries, its own impossibilities, its own way of refusing to behave like a house should behave. The Griffin House at 31 Spooner Street is doing something strange. It has been doing it for 25 years. And if you've never noticed, tonight might be the night you do. There's one more layer to Meg's story that the show addresses only obliquely, but which fans have assembled into something coherent from scattered evidence across the seasons. It concerns the question of Meg's biological parentage. In the season 15 episode, Peter's Sister, the show reveals that Peter was abused by his own sister, Karen, when they were growing up. Karen was physically and emotionally cruel to Peter throughout their childhood, and the revelation helps explain, though not excuse, the pattern of how Peter treats Meg. The abuse cycle is depicted as having moved across a generation, but earlier seasons hint at something potentially more destabilizing. There are episodes, particularly in the earlier seasons, where Meg's origins are gestured at in ways that suggest she may not be Peter's biological daughter. The hints are never explicit, and the show has never confirmed anything. But Meg's physical appearance is frequently noted as different from the rest of the family. Her social difficulties are described as constitutional rather than circumstantial, and there is at least one episode where Peter's behavior toward Meg is explained by other characters as consistent with a man who knows or suspects that Meg is not his. This theory remains unconfirmed. It may be intentional misdirection by the writers. It may be a genuine piece of unresolved backstory that the show introduced and then abandoned. Or it may be that the show wanted the possibility to live in the background, an unanswered question that gives Meg's situation an additional dimension without ever forcing the story into explicit territory. If Meg is not Peter's biological daughter, then the abuse has a different shape. Not the broken cycle of a man repeating what was done to him, but something more deliberate, more specific. A man directing damage toward a child who represents something he doesn't want to face. And if Lois knows or suspects, then Lois's occasional coldness toward Meg, her surprising lack of maternal protection in the face of Peter's treatment, also takes on a different tone. Not negligence exactly. Something more like guilt that is curdled into distance. These are dark waters, and the show has never fully swum into them, but they're there, just beneath the surface. Possible, present, waiting. Meg sits in her room with the door closed. Outside the door, the family moves through its routines. The history of the house holds its shape. Some mysteries stay mysteries because the answer is too much to say out loud. Rest in that if you can. The kindness in not knowing, the mercy of uncertainty. And let's go to the house itself, because the house at 31 Spooner Street is doing something that no real house could do, and has been doing it since the very first episode. The Mila Kunis dimension of Meg's story deserves a moment of attention, because it adds a layer of real-world strangeness to an already strange portrait. Mila Kunis has voiced Meg Griffin since the second season, taking over from Lacey Chabert, who voiced Meg in the pilot and part of the first season. Kunis was a teenager when she first started recording lines for Meg, and she has continued voicing the character into her 30s. She has been, for most of her adult professional life, one of the most recognizable actors in Hollywood, from That 70s Show to Black Swan to various films that have nothing to do with animation. And in parallel with that career, she has spent those same years being the voice of the most mistreated character in primetime animation. Kunis has spoken publicly about this duality, and her comments have ranged from amused to genuinely reflective. She has noted that the dismissive catchphrase the show gave Peter directed at Meg became something people said to her, the real person, when they recognized her at events or on the street. The fictional cruelty bleeding into the real world in this low-level, persistent way. Not threatening, not malicious, just strange. The echo of a character's suffering reaching the person who gives that character her voice. There's something worth sitting with there. The way fiction leaves marks on reality. The way a joke repeated often enough takes on a weight that its original context couldn't have predicted. Meg Griffin is a fictional character voiced by a real person who has spent a quarter-century watching that character absorb damage she doesn't deserve. And in small, mundane ways, that damage has touched the real person at the edge of it. Fiction is not sealed. It leaks. It finds its way out. And Meg's story, carried by Kunis's voice all these years, has leaked further and more persistently than most. That's the last layer of Meg's mystery for tonight. The real and the fictional, touching at the edges. A voice in a booth, becoming a character on a screen, becoming a punchline on a street, becoming an echo of something real. All of it, somehow, holding together. Now let's look at the building itself. Section 7. The Griffin House has no rules. The house at 31 Spooner Street, Quahog, Rhode Island, appears in every episode of Family Guy. It is arguably the most seen single location in the show's history. The living room especially, with its yellow sofa and television, and the specific warmth of afternoon light through its windows, has been the backdrop for more scenes than any other place in the show's world. It is the show's heart, its anchor, the thing that holds the story in place when everything else is spinning. And the house is physically impossible. This is not a complaint. It's a feature. The house at 31 Spooner Street obeys rules that have nothing to do with architecture or physics or the geometry of suburban construction. And the longer you track its inconsistencies, the more fascinating they become. Let's start with what the house looks like from the outside. The exterior is consistent across episodes: a two-story white colonial with green shutters, a small front yard, a garage, a side door. It's a recognizable type. The kind of house that fills New England suburbs, solidly middle class, weathered in the way that East Coast houses get weathered. The exterior of the Griffin house is one of the most stable images in the show. Step inside and reality begins to flex. The living room is the show's default interior. It contains a yellow sofa, a recliner that belongs to Peter, a television, a fireplace, stairs leading to the second floor, and a piano that Lois plays. The dimensions of this room have never been consistent. In some episodes, the room is intimate. Characters can reach each other in a step or two. In others, there seems to be significant distance between the sofa and the television. The fireplace migrates. The piano is sometimes against the wall to the left of the stairs, sometimes to the right, sometimes replaced by something else entirely. The kitchen is connected to the living room, but in ways that shift. The door between them is sometimes visible from the sofa. Sometimes it requires walking through a hallway that appears in only some episodes. The kitchen itself, its size, its counter configuration, the position of the table varies. The dining table is there for holiday episodes and family dinners, and then is elsewhere or absent for episodes where the story doesn't need it. The second floor is even more elastic. Meg's room is upstairs. Chris's room is upstairs. The master bedroom, Peter and Lois's room, is upstairs. And Stewie's nursery is upstairs, adjacent to a bathroom. These are the rooms the show uses. They are generally consistent within themselves, though their sizes and exact positions vary. But the floor plan implied by these rooms, when fans have attempted to map it, doesn't match the exterior of the house. The upstairs square footage implied by the rooms exceeds what the exterior suggests is possible. The staircase, depending on the episode, reaches the second floor at different points, suggesting different layouts. And the nursery, Stewie's nursery, appears, in certain episodes, to be considerably larger than the exterior of the house would allow. Stewie's nursery, in fact, has become its own sub-mystery within the larger mystery of the house. The nursery contains Stewie's crib, obviously. It contains his weapons stockpile. It contains the laboratory where he builds his devices, and these devices include, at various points, a fully functional time machine, a teleporter, a mind control helmet, a weather control device, and numerous other pieces of technology that, in terms of physical scale, should require more space than a single room in a suburban house can provide. The time machine alone, in most of its depictions, is the size of a small car. Where is it stored? The show occasionally acknowledges this. There are jokes about Stewie's room being impossible, but the acknowledgement doesn't resolve the spatial problem. The stuff is there. The room is not large enough to contain it. And yet, there it is. The basement is perhaps the most inconsistent space in the house. It exists in some episodes and doesn't exist in others. When it exists, it's used for storage, for scenes that require a dimly lit underground space, for various story purposes. When the story doesn't need a basement, the basement isn't there. It's one of the purest expressions of Quahog's approach to architecture. Spaces exist when they're needed and cease to exist when they're not. There's a theory among fans, and it's stated semi-seriously, with the kind of precision that characterizes the best fan theories, that the Griffin House is not a physical structure in the conventional sense. It is instead something closer to a psychic space. A house that exists in the collective unconscious of the Griffin family, shaped by their needs and desires, expanding and contracting in response to what they need it to be. When Stewie needs a laboratory, the nursery contains a laboratory. When the show needs a basement, there's a basement. When Peter needs the living room to be intimate for a tender moment, the room shrinks. When he needs it to be large enough for chaos, it expands. The house doesn't describe a space, it creates one. And the creation is always appropriate to the emotional or narrative need of the moment. This is, if you think about it, a perfect description of how memory and attachment work in real life. The house you grew up in, as you hold it in your mind, is not a fixed architectural plan. It's a collection of feelings shaped as rooms. The kitchen is the smell of something cooking and the sound of a particular kind of conversation. The bedroom is the specific feeling of being small in a large darkness. The living room is everyone together, the television talking, the light, a particular shade of afternoon gold. The Griffin House, with its shifting walls and impossible basement and nursery that's bigger on the inside, is the house as it lives in the minds of the people who inhabit it. It's accurate to the feeling, not the square footage. There's a specific fan observation that always comes up in discussions of the house's impossible geometry: the Griffin backyard. The backyard appears in numerous episodes and is used for cookouts, confrontations, and various outdoor activities. It is generally depicted as spacious, a real backyard, the kind you can move around in. But Spooner Street, as depicted in aerial shots and street-level establishing shots, is a suburban street with relatively small lots. The backyard implied by these establishing shots is not the backyard depicted in the episodes that use it. The backyard is, somehow, larger than the property. Quahog is a town where space behaves differently, where a house on a small lot can have a sprawling yard, where a nursery can contain a time machine, where a living room can be intimate or vast depending on who needs what. There's something oddly comforting about this, if you let yourself receive it that way. The idea of a space that gives you what you need. That grows when you need room and contracts when you need closeness. That holds your things without complaint, without limit. 31 Spooner Street is more house than it appears to be. Far more. The lights are on in the kitchen. The piano in the living room waits for Lois to come and find it. Somewhere upstairs, the time machine hums quietly to itself in a room that shouldn't be able to contain it. The house is ready. It's always ready. Come in. There's room for everything here. And speaking of rooms that shouldn't exist and things that shouldn't be possible, the next subject is the one that touches every character in the show, affects every storyline, and represents perhaps the most fundamental departure from realistic storytelling that Family Guy makes. We need to talk about death, about what it means in Quahog, about how many times characters have died, and what happened afterward, and whether any of it means anything. Because in Quahog, death is not what it is elsewhere. It's something else entirely. There's another dimension of the house worth exploring, what it says about the Griffins economically. Peter works at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery in a job that, based on everything the show depicts, is a blue-collar hourly position. He is not management. He is not making significant money. His career history before the brewery includes the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory, a fishing boat, and various other positions that don't suggest economic advancement. Lois does not, in most seasons, have consistent paid employment. She plays piano, she occasionally works in retail or service jobs, but the family's primary income is Peter. On that income, the Griffins own a 2-story colonial home in what appears to be a comfortable suburb of Rhode Island. They take vacations, they attend events, they have a car. The children attend school without issue. Brian drinks expensive martinis. Stewie's laboratory equipment, the cost of which would be astronomical if it were possible to buy time machine components, is simply there, present, taken for granted. The Griffins are working class by description and middle class by lifestyle, which is, again, not unusual for television families, where the economics are always slightly aspirational. But the degree to which the show stretches this gap is notable. Peter's salary, realistically calculated for a brewery worker in Rhode Island, would not sustain the life the Griffins live, not by a significant margin. Fans have proposed various explanations. The most common is that Lois's family money supplements the family's income. The Pewterschmidt family, Lois's parents, Carter and Barbara, are extremely wealthy. Carter Pewterschmidt is depicted as a billionaire or something close to it. The assumption is that Lois receives some financial support from her parents, either directly or through trusts, that fills the gap between Peter's income and the family's actual lifestyle. But the show doesn't confirm this explicitly. The Pewterschmidts are depicted as largely withholding with their money. Carter in particular has made it clear that he never approved of Lois's marriage to Peter and resents subsidizing their life. There are episodes where financial support is explicitly denied. And yet the Griffins keep living their life. The house accommodates this too. It's as affordable as it needs to be, as large as it needs to be, as stable as the story requires. 31 Spooner Street is not bound by economics any more than it's bound by square footage. It exists in the realm of the show's internal logic, where the things that need to be true are true, and the things that would be inconvenient are simply not examined. There's a peace in that, actually. A lot of shows create this pocket of space where the money question doesn't quite reach, where the family can just be, without the grinding weight of economic reality intruding on every choice. The living room is there, the piano is there, the sofa is warm. Whatever it costs, it's covered. Tonight, don't worry about how. Just feel the warmth of a house that holds what it needs to hold. That's 31 Spooner Street. That's always been 31 Spooner Street. And now we need to talk about Brian's death. About the day Quahog lost someone, and what happened next, and what the whole episode says about the nature of loss and permanence in a world where nothing is supposed to be permanent. It's not a sad story exactly, but it's a strange one. And in Quahog, the strange ones are always the most interesting. Before we leave the house entirely, there's one more architectural oddity that deserves mention, a small detail that fans have tracked, and that adds a specific texture to the show's visual history. The television in the Griffin living room changes. Not dramatically, not in ways most viewers would clock consciously, but consistently enough that fans who have cataloged it can point to the changes across seasons. In the earliest episodes, the TV is relatively small and boxy, the technology of the late 1990s. Over the years, it gets larger, flatter, more contemporary. This is the show updating its visuals to stay current, which is natural and expected. But the show also occasionally references having a new television as a plot point. Peter has, in at least 2 separate storylines, acquired a new TV under various circumstances. So the visual updates are sometimes diegetic, embedded in the story, and sometimes just production choices made outside the world of the show. The result is a television that exists simultaneously in the show's time and outside it. When Peter sits down in his recliner and watches TV, he is watching a TV that is always contemporary, not a relic from the year the show started, but always updated, always now. Like everything else in Quahog, the TV lives in an eternal present. This small detail is a microcosm of the whole show's relationship with time. Frozen and updated simultaneously. Always now. Always the same living room, the same family, the same yellow sofa, and yet also always contemporary, always current, always responding to the year the audience is watching from. The house breathes with the present moment. It shifts so slightly, so continuously, that you never notice it changing. You look up one day and realize the TV is different, but you can't remember when it changed. That's how Quahog works. That's how all of it works. So gradual you almost miss it. So constant it feels like nothing. Rest in the amber light of that living room. The TV murmurs. Peter is in his chair. The house is larger than it should be, smaller than it feels, and exactly the right size for what it needs to hold. Now let's go outside, into the street, into the world of Quahog, where death comes and goes like weather, where characters fall and rise, where the impossible is simply what happens on Tuesdays. We need to talk about the day Brian Griffin died. Section 8. Death means nothing in Quahog. On the 24th of November 2013, the Family Guy episode Life of Brian aired on Fox. In it, Brian Griffin was hit by a car while playing in the street with Stewie. He was taken to a veterinary hospital. He died on the table. The family gathered around him. Stewie held his paw. Brian said goodbye. And then Brian Griffin, one of the most recognizable characters in animated television, the voice of reason in the Griffin household, the dog who had been drinking martinis and arguing about literature since the very first episode, was gone. The response was extraordinary. Not just unusual by the standards of animated comedy, extraordinary by any standard. The death of Brian Griffin became a genuine national news event. It trended on social media. Entertainment media ran full stories. Fans expressed grief, outrage, and disbelief in proportions that television character deaths rarely generate. A petition to bring Brian back collected signatures in the hundreds of thousands. 2 episodes later, in the Christmas episode Christmas Guy, Stewie used a time travel device to go back and save Brian from being hit by the car. Brian was alive again. The whole thing was undone. And the reaction to that was equally extraordinary, not relief, but a different kind of outrage. Fans who had accepted Brian's death, who had moved through the stages of processing it, felt cheated. The death had been a stunt, a ratings gambit, a way to generate attention and viewership before restoring the status quo with maximum sentimentality. Both reactions are understandable. And together, they illuminate something important about what death means in Quahog and what it reveals about the show's fundamental contract with its audience. Death in Family Guy has never been consistent. Characters die and return without explanation. Characters are killed in cutaway gags and are alive in the next scene. In Da Boom, the show's post-apocalyptic episode, significant portions of the world's population die, and by the next episode, everything is normal. Quagmire has died and not died. Peter has died and not died. The show treats death the way it treats most things, as a tool available when the story needs it, revocable when the story needs something else. This is not unique to Family Guy. Animated shows generally operate with a more casual relationship to consequence and permanence than live-action drama. The Simpsons has done it. South Park does it constantly and makes it part of the show's identity. Kenny's recurring death and resurrection is practically the show's central premise. Cartoon deaths are different from real deaths. Everyone understands this. But Brian's death hit differently because the show asked the audience to take it seriously. It wasn't played as a gag. It wasn't framed as temporary. The episode used the full grammar of genuine loss. The hospital scene, the bedside goodbye, the family grief to tell the audience, this is real. We're really doing this. And then, 2 episodes later, it wasn't real after all. What makes this sequence of events so philosophically interesting is what it reveals about the nature of stakes in Quahog. For a death to have emotional weight, the audience must believe it is permanent. The show asked for that belief. The audience gave it, and then the belief was revealed to have been misplaced. This is the nature of the contract between a show and its audience when it comes to death. The audience agrees to feel things, and the show agrees to honor those feelings by not making them retroactively meaningless. When the show breaks that contract, when it kills a character to generate feeling and then erases the death to reset the status quo, it doesn't just undo the death. It retroactively undoes the grief. It turns real emotional response into something that was, it turns out, a joke. Fans have never fully forgiven the show for this. Not because they wanted Brian to stay dead, most fans were genuinely glad to have him back, but because the sequence confirmed something they'd suspected. The show would do anything for attention, and the feelings of its audience were a resource to be harvested rather than honored. The replacement dog, Vinny, voiced by Tony Sirico of The Sopranos, is one of the more poignant side effects of this two-episode arc. Vinny was introduced in Life of Brian as the Griffin family's new dog after Brian's death. He was Italian-American in personality, warm, funny in a different way from Brian, clearly an attempt to create a character who could occupy Brian's narrative space. He was, in the 2 episodes he appeared in as the family's dog, charming in a way that suggested the show could have done something with him if it had committed to the direction. It didn't. When Brian was resurrected, Vinny disappeared. He has appeared occasionally in later episodes, but his role has never been developed. He exists in the show's mythology as a ghost, the alternative, the path not taken, the brief moment when Quahog tried to accommodate a real loss. The other deaths in Quahog form a pattern worth examining. Diane Simmons, the Channel 5 newswoman who had been a recurring character since the early seasons, was killed in a Season 9 episode in a way that the show played entirely straight, and that stuck. She stayed dead. Muriel Goldman, Mort Goldman's wife, was killed in Season 8, also in a way that stuck. These deaths were significant enough to generate fan response, and they stayed. The difference between these deaths and Brian's death reveals the show's logic. Regular characters can be permanently killed. Main characters get the pretense of permanence, but not the reality of it. The Griffins and their immediate inner circle are, at some level, functionally immortal. They can be imperiled. They can appear to die. They can be used as emotional instruments. But they will return, because the show cannot exist without them. Quahog protects its essential characters with something like divine immunity. Death is real for everyone around the Griffins, but for the Griffins themselves and for Brian, who is honorary Griffin in every sense that matters, death is a temporary condition. This has led to a theory that is simultaneously funny and strangely profound, that the Griffin family is cosmically significant to Quahog, that the town exists, in some structural sense, because of them, that the universe of the show is organized around their survival, the way a story is organized around its protagonists because they are the protagonists, and protagonists don't die, because if they died, there would be no story. In this reading, the Griffins aren't just lucky or resilient. They are held in place by narrative necessity. The town curves around them. Reality accommodates their survival. Death, for the Griffins, is not the end of experience, but a temporary interruption of it because experience, in Quahog, requires them to continue. Brian's resurrection via time travel is the show making this implicit logic explicit. Stewie went back in time specifically because Brian dying was narratively unacceptable, not emotionally narratively. The story couldn't continue without him, so the story reached back and corrected itself. Quahog is a town that corrects itself, that refuses certain losses, that holds its essential people in place through whatever mechanism the story provides. There's comfort in that, if you receive it that way. The idea of a place that won't let go of the things it needs, that will reach through time if necessary to keep the right people here. Brian is alive. He's in the living room. He's on his second martini and he's maybe going to write a paragraph tonight, maybe not. The lamp is warm, the sofa is soft, the dog is home, and that in Quahog is what matters. Whatever it took to get there, whatever it cost, Brian is home. Let the living room hold you both. The warmth of a place that refuses to let the things it loves stay gone. That's the deepest mystery of Quahog's relationship with death, not the mechanics of resurrection, not the logic of the time machine, but the feeling underneath all of it, the refusal to accept permanent loss, the insistence that the people who matter should still be there. Most places don't work that way, but this one does, and on the coldest nights, that's the thing to hold on to. The question of who can die in Quahog and who can't has a flip side that's equally interesting. The question of characters who have died and stayed dead, and what their permanent absence says about the world of the show. James Woods appears in multiple episodes as himself and is, depending on the episode, anything from a minor inconvenience to a genuine antagonist. In the Season 8 episode, And I'm Joyce Kinney, there are suggestions of various characters' deaths, but the clearest example of a meaningful, permanent death in the main cast's orbit is Adam West, who died in real life in 2017. Mayor Adam West had been a recurring character in Family Guy from very early in the show's run. He played a version of himself, the same Adam West who had played Batman, who had the same history, who occasionally acknowledged his own fame in self-deprecating ways that were consistently charming. He appeared across many seasons, always as Mayor of Quahog, always with the same gentle, slightly bewildered dignity. When Adam West died in June 2017, the show faced a choice: recast the character with another actor, quietly retire him, or address the death directly. The show's season 15 finale, He's Black, in 2017 had already been produced before West's death, but the show added a tribute to the end of the episode, a message acknowledging West's passing and the character's significance to the show. In subsequent seasons, Mayor West has not been meaningfully replaced. There have been references to his absence and his legacy, but the show chose not to put another actor in his place. This decision, honoring West's actual death by allowing Mayor West to also be gone from the show's world, is meaningful precisely because of how rare it is. Quahog is a town that doesn't accept permanent loss. And yet, for Adam West, the town accepted it. The show acknowledged that some losses are real, that some things don't get corrected. Mayor Adam West is gone from Quahog. The office still exists, the town still functions, but the specific warmth of that character, the particular strangeness he brought to every room he entered, that's gone. Some losses, even in Quahog, stay lost. And the show, in honoring that, says something quiet and genuine about the people it has held over the years, about what it means to have someone be part of a world for a long time, about the mark that leaves. The town carries it, the way all towns carry their losses, mostly quietly, mostly in the background, but carried. The chair that was his remains empty. The townspeople pass by it. The show goes on, and the loss is real. Let that settle softly as we turn from the question of death to the question of a specific resident of Spooner Street whose life is, in many ways, the show's deepest mystery. A man with a past that the show has gradually revealed in pieces, each piece more extraordinary than the last. We're going to Quagmire's house. He doesn't know we're coming. He'd prefer it that way. But there are things about Glenn Quagmire that deserve to be said out loud, and tonight seems like the right time. There's one more death-adjacent story in Quahog that deserves mention before we leave this subject: the peculiar, fascinating, deeply weird arc of Peter Griffin's father. Francis Griffin, the man Peter grew up calling Dad, the stern Irish Catholic who shaped Peter's relationship with authority, faith, and emotional expression, died in the Season 5 episode Peter's Two Dads. He died of a heart attack, which is itself a slightly narratively convenient death given that the same episode reveals Francis isn't Peter's biological father. The timing creates an interesting implication. Did the revelation somehow precipitate Francis's death? Did the confrontation between Peter and the truth of his parentage take something from Francis? The show doesn't pursue this, but the connection is there. Francis Griffin died and stayed dead. He's appeared in flashbacks, as a ghost-like presence in emotional scenes, and in Meg and Chris's memories of a grandfather they barely knew. But he didn't come back. He was allowed to remain gone. This permanence makes Francis's death more meaningful in retrospect than most deaths in the show. He was a significant figure, perhaps the most significant father figure in Peter's life, despite his emotional failures, and he stayed gone. Quahog kept this loss. The contrast with Brian's resurrection is stark. Brian funny, drinking, unfinished novel Brian got a time machine rescue. Francis Griffin, who shaped Peter in ways Peter has never fully reckoned with, just died. You could read something into that contrast. The show rescues the characters who make it run. It allows the characters who challenge its protagonists to leave. The people who hold Peter accountable, who represent the weight of expectation and judgment and family legacy, get to stay dead. And the people Peter loves unconditionally, who love him back without demanding he be anything other than what he is, those people get rescued. Francis was a hard man. He made Peter feel small. He may have known or suspected a secret about Peter's birth that he carried without sharing. He was not the ideal father, but he was Peter's father. In every way that wasn't biological, he was. And he's gone. And the show moved on. Quahog is not always fair. It holds what it needs and releases what it can. Not everything gets a resurrection. Not every loss gets corrected. That's real, even here. Breathe through it. Let the image of Francis Griffin settle quietly in whatever part of the mind holds people you needed more time with. And then, let it go. The night is still warm, the town is still here, and there are more stories to tell, in other houses, with other people who keep their own mysteries. Let's go to Quagmires. Section 9, Quagmire, the man behind the mask. Glenn Quagmire is, on the surface, the show's least complicated character. He is the womanizer in the friend group, the one whose personality is organized almost entirely around his pursuit of women. He says his catchphrase, he makes his jokes, he grins his enormous grin. He is an exaggerated type, a cartoon of masculine sexual fixation, and for many casual viewers, that's the whole story. But Glenn Quagmire has a biography that the show has revealed in fragments across its entire run, and when you assemble those fragments, what emerges is not a simple character at all. It is one of the most surprising, most genuinely complex portraits in the show. A man whose surface is pure comedy and whose depth, when glimpsed, is something closer to tragedy. Start with the things the show establishes about Quagmire's professional life, because they are immediately at odds with the character as usually perceived. Glenn Quagmire is a commercial airline pilot. He works for an airline based at Quahog's airport, and he is apparently good at his job, consistently described by other characters as excellent and by the show's visual shorthand as competent and skilled in the cockpit. He is not a dilettante or an amateur. He is a trained professional who operates heavy commercial aircraft. He also served in the United States Navy. This is established in multiple episodes and gives Quagmire a military background that the show occasionally uses for plot purposes but more often leaves as background texture. He was in the Navy. He flew there too. He has a military bearing, even under the jokes, that occasionally surfaces in how he carries himself. This military and professional background matters because it places Quagmire in a category of character the show rarely develops fully: the competent man. Peter is consistently depicted as incompetent, as someone who succeeds despite himself, whose outcomes are determined by luck and the forgiveness of the universe. Joe is competent, but his competence is heavily freighted with the tragedy of his disability. Cleveland is competent and decent but underwritten. Quagmire is quietly the most professionally accomplished person in the friend group, and the show mostly treats this as background noise. His age is one of the show's most famous running mysteries. In the Season 4 episode Peter's Got Woods, Quagmire's age is established as 61. This is presented as a joke. Quagmire looks like a man in his 30s or 40s, and his lifestyle is not that of a 61-year-old, but the show commits to it sufficiently that it's become canon. Glenn Quagmire is, by the numbers, more than 30 years older than he appears. This has generated significant fan analysis. The most common explanation involves moisturizer. The show has Quagmire himself attribute his youthful appearance to skincare, but fans have also suggested that Quagmire's apparent age is the result of something the show has never explicitly said: that he has experienced things, survived things, been through enough that the years simply didn't land on him the way they land on people who live more ordinary lives. Some experiences burn through time. Some people come out the other side somehow lighter than the years should allow. Quagmire has, in this reading, lived multiple lifetimes: the Navy, the airlines, the decades of romantic encounters. He has been everywhere, done everything, known a staggering number of people. The youth in his face is not the result of moisturizer. It's the result of someone who never settled, never stopped, never accumulated the weight of a single fixed life. Quagmire stayed in motion, and motion somehow kept him from aging. Now let's go to the moments in the show where Quagmire's depth surfaces most clearly, because they are genuinely remarkable. The episode Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, from Season 10, is one of the darkest episodes in the show's history, and one of the most seriously intentioned. In it, Quagmire's sister Brenda is in an abusive relationship with a man named Jeff. The episode depicts the abuse with unusual directness for an animated comedy and positions Quagmire, the show's designated comic relief on the subject of women, as the character who most clearly sees what's happening and who ultimately takes action to protect his sister. The episode ends with Quagmire killing Jeff. It's not depicted graphically, but it's clear. Quagmire murders the man who was abusing his sister, and the show treats this not as a joke, but as the conclusion of a genuine moral crisis. Quagmire did the thing. He did it to protect someone he loves. The show doesn't punish him for it, and doesn't quite celebrate it either. It just allows it to be true. This episode recontextualizes Quagmire significantly. The man who has treated women as objects who has, in many episodes, behaved in ways that range from cringe-inducing to genuinely troubling, is the same man who will, when it matters, take devastating action to protect a woman who is being hurt. His relationship with women is not simple. It never was. The surface jokes about his lifestyle coexist with a genuine, fierce protectiveness that the show has shown, in this episode, can manifest as something absolute. His father is perhaps the most surprising piece of Quagmire's backstory. In the Season 8 episode Quagmire's Dad, it's revealed that Quagmire's father, a decorated Navy veteran named Dan Quagmire, who Quagmire clearly idolizes, is transgender. Dan has known for years that she is a woman, and the episode deals with her coming out to Quagmire and the family. The episode's handling of this is imperfect. There are jokes in it that have aged badly and that were criticized at the time, but the emotional core of the storyline is genuine. Quagmire, for all his swagger, is shown to be fundamentally conservative in how he has understood his father, as a hero, as a military man, as the model of a particular kind of masculine achievement. The revelation requires him to reassemble that understanding. And he does, eventually. The episode ends with Quagmire accepting his father for who she is. What this adds to the portrait of Quagmire is the dimension of loss and reconstruction. Quagmire has spent his life performing a version of masculinity, loud, confident, sexually dominant, and the episode suggests that this performance has a specific origin. He was building himself in the image of a father he had idealized. When that image shifted, he had to figure out who he was without it. This is, quietly, a profound piece of character work, and it fits. The catchphrase, the grin, the constant, almost compulsive pursuit of women. All of it reads differently once you know what Quagmire was trying to be, and why, and how the ground shifted under that attempt. The Season 8 episode, Jerome is the New Black, contains what is arguably the most famous piece of character work in Quagmire's entire history, the speech he delivers to Brian. Quagmire, who has always seemed to dislike Brian without being able to fully articulate why, finally says it all. He lays out every way in which Brian is a fraud. The pretensions to intellectualism without the actual work. The romantic failures rooted in selfishness rather than bad luck. The hypocrisy of a character who judges everyone else by standards he doesn't meet himself. The speech is devastating and, within the show's world, entirely accurate. Everything Quagmire says is supported by what the show has depicted. It's not a rant. It's a list of observable facts about a person Quagmire has watched carefully for a long time. Why has Quagmire watched Brian so carefully? The speech suggests it's partly disgust, partly frustration. But there's a theory, and it's one of the more interesting ones in the show's fan discourse, that Quagmire's hatred of Brian is rooted in recognition. That Brian, in his pretensions and his failures, and his refusal to live up to his own self-image, reflects something Quagmire sees in himself. The part of Quagmire that performs rather than is. The gap between the man Quagmire presents and the man he is when nobody is looking. He hates Brian because Brian is a mirror. And mirrors that show you things you'd rather not see produce exactly this kind of specific, articulate fury. Quagmire is not a simple character. He has never been a simple character. The giggity jokes and the catchphrase are the surface, the way that many people's loudest qualities are the surface of something much more complicated underneath. The man served in the Navy. He protected his sister in the most absolute way available to him. He reassembled his understanding of his father when everything he thought he knew turned out to be incomplete. He has flown in an airplane through weather that would ground most pilots, and he has always come home. Glenn Quagmire, 61 years old, somehow. A pilot, a veteran, a man with a past that runs deeper than any joke. The house next door to the Griffins is quiet tonight. The lights are low. Whatever Quagmire's doing in there, it's his business. But now you know a little more about who he is, about the shape of the life behind the performance. And that, in Quahog, is more than most people get. Let his house be dark and quiet as we float upward, away from Spooner Street, above the rooftops of Quahog, high enough to see the town laid out below us in the dark. The streets and the houses and the harbor and the bar and the TV station, all of it holding its secrets. All of it turning slowly in the permanent, unchanging present. We need to talk about that now. About what it means for time itself in this place. About a town that has been frozen for 25 years and what that means for everyone who lives inside it. The clock doesn't move in Quahog, but everyone inside it does. That's the next mystery. There's one more piece of the Quagmire mystery that deserves attention before we move on, a question that the show has raised but never answered, and that sits in the background of his entire biography like a faint signal you can almost make out. Why does Quagmire live next door to the Griffins? This sounds like a trivial question. Of course, he lives next door, he's a supporting character. Proximity to the main family is how supporting characters work. But pushed slightly, the question opens into something more interesting. Quagmire is, by any reasonable measure, significantly more successful than Peter Griffin. He has a profession with genuine earning power. He has traveled the world. He is clearly not bound to Quahog by necessity the way Peter is bound by his brewery job or his family's roots. Quagmire could live anywhere. He lives at 29 Spooner Street. He has lived there for the entire run of the show. He is not depicted as looking for somewhere else to live. He is, in every indication the show provides, settled, content, even. At 29 Spooner Street, next door to a family that is constantly generating chaos, crisis, and demands on his time and goodwill. The relationship between Quagmire and the Griffin family is deeper than the friend group framing suggests. He has, across the show's history, helped them significantly. He has used his connections, his skills, and his knowledge to assist them in ways that go considerably beyond neighborly courtesy. He has kept secrets for them. He has cleaned up messes. And he has done all of this while maintaining the comedy persona, the catchphrase, the grin, the lifestyle, as though the assistance is incidental, as though he's just a neighbor who happens to be useful. Why? One reading is pure loyalty. Quagmire, for all his surface behavior, is someone who fiercely protects the people he cares about, his sister, his father, his friends. The Griffins are in that category. Whatever Peter is, however annoying Brian may be, the Griffins are Quagmire's people, and Quagmire's people don't get abandoned. Another reading involves the apartment he could have anywhere and the house he actually has. Quagmire, with his history, with the things he has done and been, might need the noise, the chaos. The constant low-level drama of living next door to Peter Griffin might, for a man who has flown over oceans and survived things he doesn't discuss, provide something essential, proof that the world is mundane, evidence that there are still Tuesday nights with beers at the Drunken Clam, that not everything is large and dangerous and requiring skill. Peter Griffin's stupidity is, in this reading, soothing to Quagmire, a reminder that the world contains something lighter than what Quagmire has known. He stays for the same reason anyone returns, again and again, to a place that is chaotic and imperfect and entirely familiar, because it is home, and home is not about what's ideal. It's about what holds you. 29 Spooner Street holds Quagmire, the way 31 Spooner Street holds the Griffins. The two houses, side by side. The lights warm on both sides of the fence. That's the neighborhood. That's always been the neighborhood. Rest in it. As the night deepens and the town quiets and we rise above the rooftops one more time to look at Quahog from above. There are still more mysteries to cover. Time. The multiverse. The theories that reframe everything. But the deepest mysteries, the ones that stay with you, are the simple ones. Why people live where they live. Why they stay. What they find in the people they find. Quagmire is where he is because it's where he's supposed to be. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. Section 10 time, age, and the loop that never ends. There's a question that anyone who has watched Family Guy for a significant length of time eventually asks, usually while watching an episode from a recent season and feeling a subtle dissonance. When, exactly, is this happening? The easy answer, the answer that covers most animated comedies, is that it's always happening now. Family Guy uses a floating timeline. Characters don't age. The world updates to stay contemporary. The Griffins in 2024 are the same age as the Griffins in 1999. Give or take. the very occasional episode where a character's age is explicitly referenced. This is standard. This is how The Simpsons works. This is how animated shows work. But Family Guy does something in addition to the floating timeline that creates strange wrinkles in the show's relationship with time, something that accumulates across seasons into what can only be described as a temporal paradox. The show references history. Specifically, it references the personal histories of its characters, and those histories are anchored in real-time periods. Peter grew up watching television shows from the 1970s. He experienced events from his childhood and adolescence that are depicted as occurring in specific decades. His high school experiences, his early adult years, his meeting of Lois, these are placed in various episodes in a rough historical sequence that implies Peter was born in the mid-1960s and came of age in the 1980s. Fine. That's consistent with a man in his early 40s, if the show is set in the early 2000s. But the show is not set in the early 2000s. It is set in the permanent present, which is now whatever year a given viewer is watching from. And as the years have passed, the historical anchoring of Peter's backstory has had to shift, because the alternative would be to acknowledge that Peter should be getting older. So the show updates his history. References that were, in early seasons, to events in the 1970s and 1980s have been moved, in later episodes, to the 1990s and 2000s. Peter's formative years now happen more recently than they did when the show started. This means that Peter Griffin's personal history is not fixed. It moves. It updates. His childhood didn't happen in the 1970s in an immutable past. It happened in whatever decade is 30 years before the show's current present. As the present advances, so does his past. The result, if you track it carefully, is a Peter Griffin whose biographical history is a river, not a record. It flows forward. The specific content of his past changes to accommodate the current moment. This is philosophically interesting in a way that goes beyond television. It suggests something about memory and identity, that the past is not the fixed, deterministic thing we usually treat it as, that it's shaped by the present, that who we are now influences what we remember of who we were, that the past is always in some sense a present tense construction. Quahog models this. The town's history is not archaeological. You can't dig down and find stable strata. The history is living. It breathes. It adjusts. Now add Stewie's time machine to this equation. Stewie's time machine has been used in multiple episodes, and each use creates what should be an irreversible alteration of the timeline. Characters have gone back in time and done things that should change the present. They have gone forward in time and seen futures that, if those futures came to pass, would imply a specific course of events in the intervening years. The time machine is a device for disrupting causality, and it has been used repeatedly, and yet the present remains stable. Nothing that happens via time travel, apparently, significantly alters the ongoing present of the show. The show's most explicit treatment of time travel consequences is the Season 10 episode Back to the Pilot, in which Brian and Stewie travel back to the events of the first episode. While there, they interact with their past selves. Multiple versions of Brian and Stewie, from different points in the timeline, converge on the same moment. The episode is funny and self-referential, but it also raises, without answering, the question of what all this time travel does to the timeline. The answer, implicitly, is nothing. The timeline is not fragile. It does not break when interfered with. Whatever changes are made, the present reasserts itself. Quahog in the present moment is the present moment, regardless of what has been done to the past to arrive here. This temporal resilience is one of Quahog's most striking properties. It is, in the vocabulary of physics, a timeline that resists perturbation. You can send characters back in time, you can change events, you can create paradoxes, and then the show returns to Tuesday evening on Spooner Street, as though none of it happened. Some fans have suggested that this resilience is not passive but active, that the town itself or some force within it corrects for temporal interference, that when Stewie uses the time machine, there is something in the structure of Quahog's reality that absorbs the change and restores the present, not through any mechanism the show depicts, but as a property of the place itself. This connects to the wider theory that Quahog is cosmically organized around the Griffin family's continuity. The family must continue. The present must hold. Whatever interferes with either of those things is corrected, by the town, by reality, by whatever narrative principle underlies the world of the show. The time machine is, in this reading, a toy. A very sophisticated toy that Stewie built and that genuinely works, but that operates within a universe which will not allow it to be truly disruptive. Stewie can visit the past. Stewie can see the future. But he cannot change the fundamental trajectory, because the fundamental trajectory is the one where Quahog continues, the Griffins continue, Tuesday evening keeps returning. There's something almost meditative about that, if you receive it in the right way. A universe that returns to itself. That absorbs disruption and finds equilibrium. That cannot be permanently altered because its essential state, this family, this street, this town, is too firmly embedded in the structure of what it is. The floating timeline, which might seem like a narrative convenience, becomes something more when you think about it this way. Time doesn't advance in Quahog because time advancing would require the characters to age, and the characters aging would require them to eventually die, and the characters dying would require the town to continue without them. Quahog cannot imagine itself continuing without them, so time stays still, not out of laziness, out of love. The most peculiar expression of the show's relationship with time is the treatment of contemporary events and pop culture. Each season of Family Guy references the current moment, current politicians, current films, current music, current technology. These references anchor the episode in a specific now, but the characters, unchanged since 1999, are always contemporary. They know the same things the audience knows. They exist in the same cultural moment. This means that the Stewie who built a time machine in 1999 is the same Stewie who has references to social media, streaming services, and cultural events that wouldn't exist for another decade. The Peter of 1999 makes the same beer jokes as the Peter of 2024, but the Peter of 2024 also makes references that the Peter of 1999 couldn't have. They are continuous. They are the same. And they know everything their audience knows, always. Quahog is a town that exists at the edge of now, always. Its residents are permanent contemporaries. They do not age into irrelevance. They do not fall behind the times. They cannot, because they are of the time, they are the time, the permanent present made character and street and house. Let that sink in as you drift toward sleep. A town where time stands still so that the things worth preserving don't have to end. A family that stays young because the alternative growing old, growing apart, growing into people who no longer recognize each other is unacceptable. The clock in the Griffin living room reads the same time it did 25 years ago. The faces around the table are the same. The fights and the laughter and the dinners are the same. In a world where everything ends, Quahog refuses. And there's something in that refusal stubborn, illogical, impractical, completely impossible that the heart responds to in the dark of a quiet night. Keep it, just for tonight. The idea that some things hold. The family is still there. They will be there tomorrow, and every tomorrow after that. Time goes elsewhere. Here it stays, and we are held. There is a specific episode that explores time and age in ways the show rarely attempts, and it's one of the most genuinely affecting episodes in the show's entire run, precisely because of how starkly it contrasts with the usual frozen present logic. The episode is Brian's Got a Brand New Bag from Season 8. In it, Brian begins a relationship with a woman named Rita. Rita is older than Brian, significantly older, and the episode uses this age gap for comedy in ways that are not entirely comfortable. But buried in the episode is a genuine piece of emotional work. The show is exploring what it means for Brian, frozen at a certain age, perpetually contemporary, to have a relationship with time that is actually different from the humans around him. Brian is a dog. Dogs age differently. In real-world terms, Brian's apparent age in the show would translate to a dog who is elderly. He should be old, he should be slowing down, he should be showing the weight of the years that have supposedly passed. But he isn't, because nothing in Quahog ages, and so Brian is perpetually middle-aged in human terms, neither young nor old, always in the middle place. This creates an interesting philosophical problem. Brian wants things that require time, the novel finished, the recognition achieved, the right relationship found. But time, in Quahog, doesn't accumulate in the way that those achievements require. You can't finish a novel in a frozen present. You can't grow into your best self when growth requires the passage of years. Brian is trapped in a particularly acute version of Quahog's temporal condition. He wants to arrive somewhere, and somewhere requires a journey, and journeys require time that this place doesn't allow. The novel remains unfinished not just because Brian lacks discipline. It remains unfinished because finishing it would require a kind of linear passage, a before and after, a process of becoming that Quahog's eternal present cannot accommodate. This is sad in a way that the show generally declines to fully address. Brian is a character designed to feel things in full, and the structure of the world he lives in denies him the temporal architecture that feelings need to move through. He is stuck, not in space, but in time, always at the same point in his own trajectory. The early seasons gave us glimpses of what Brian could become if the years progressed. Older episodes showed him moving toward wisdom, toward resolution, toward a version of himself that had processed the distance between his ambitions and his reality and found something like peace. Those glimpses haven't been sustained. The show keeps resetting Brian to the same point, the same ambitions, the same failures, the same martini, the same first chapter. But the glimpses are there, in the record, proof of where Brian could go if Quahog ever let time advance. It won't. But the proof remains. And sometimes the proof of what's possible is enough to rest on, even when the possible hasn't arrived yet. Brian is at his desk, or on the sofa. The drink is beside him. The novel is open to a page that will still be unfinished tomorrow. And somewhere in that unfinished space, the best version of Brian is waiting to be written. That's the thing about time in Quahog. It doesn't end things, but it doesn't finish them either. Everything hovers, everything waits. And in the waiting, there is a kind of strange, tender grace. Let it carry you. The multiverse is next a whole episode, a whole category of possibility, a moment when the show looked at all the versions of itself and said, we could have been anything, we could have been everything. We're going to visit them all. There's a structural observation about the show's relationship with time that doesn't get made often, but that I think is worth making. Family Guy's floating timeline, for all its practical motivations, has created something that no planned narrative could have deliberately designed. The show has been contemporary for 25 years. Every generation of viewer who has come to the show in 1999, in 2005, in 2012, in 2020, in now has found it set in their present. Not in the past, not in an imagined future, but in the now of their watching. This is extraordinary. It means that the show has, in a sense, been written for every audience it has ever had, simultaneously. A show with a fixed timeline would have aged. Its cultural references would have calcified. Its world would have become historical, something you watch from the outside, an artifact of another era. Family Guy has never become that. It has always been of the moment. The Griffins are always your contemporaries. Their world is always recognizably yours. This is what time-stopping buys. Not just the practical benefit of never having to age out characters. Not just the narrative convenience of resetting between episodes. It buys presence. Continuous, unbroken presence across a quarter of a century. The show has been with you, wherever you are in time, because the show is always in your time. It meets you where you are. It doesn't require you to travel back to it. Few things in pop culture manage this. Most things age. Most things become period pieces, whether they intend to or not. But a thing that lives in a floating present that updates its references, refreshes its observations, stays calibrated to the current moment while keeping its characters frozen. Such a thing can follow you through your life without ever becoming history. Family Guy has followed a generation through their life. The people who were teenagers when it premiered in 1999 are in their 40s now. They've changed. They've grown. They have children of their own who are old enough to watch the show. And when they turn it on, the Griffins are there, exactly as they were, unchanged, contemporary, familiar. There's a particular poignancy in that for the people who have grown up with the show. You are older. Peter is the same. You have accumulated years and experiences and losses. He has not. You come back to him with the weight of time on you. He greets you from his eternal Tuesday evening, unaged, unchanged, exactly as you remember. It's not quite like seeing an old friend. It's stranger than that. An old friend would have changed with you, would have their own history of the years, their own accumulated weight. Peter doesn't have that. Peter is there, fixed, the same. It's more like a photograph that talks, a preserved moment that keeps living. And there's something in that something bittersweet, something oddly comforting about returning to a thing that holds its shape while everything around it changes. That stays the same while you become more yourself. That is always there, always contemporary, always now. Quahog waits. That's what it does. It holds its present, and it waits for you to come back. And you always do. The clock doesn't move here, but you're welcome to rest while you're here. Time enough for everything outside. Here, tonight, there is none of that. Only the town. Only the family. Only the warmth of a place that doesn't change. Come in. Stay a while. You've earned it. Section 11, Road to the Multiverse. Every version of Quahog. The 8th season premiere of Family Guy, which aired on the 27th of September 2009, is called Road to the Multiverse. It is widely considered one of the greatest episodes the show has ever produced. It won a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program. It was watched by over 10 million viewers on its original broadcast. It is the episode that most clearly demonstrates what the show can do when it commits fully to a creative idea and pursues it with genuine ambition. The premise is simple in description and ambitious in execution. Stewie has built a device that allows him and Brian to travel between parallel universes. Each universe is a version of reality where one thing is different. One choice was made differently. One event went another way. One fundamental assumption about the world doesn't apply. Brian and Stewie travel from universe to universe, see each alternate world, and then move on. The episode is structured as a tour, an inventory of possibilities. What makes it extraordinary is what the show does with each universe. Rather than simply depicting different story possibilities, different versions of what the characters' lives could be like, the episode uses each universe as a genuine creative exercise. The universes are not just narratively different from each other. They are visually different. Each one is rendered in a completely different art style, with different animation, different tone, different rules. The episode is essentially 12 short films made in 12 different visual modes, connected by the through line of Brian and Stewie moving between them. Let's walk through them. The first universe the pair visit is one where Christianity never existed. The episode suggests that without Christianity as a driver of certain historical patterns, scientific advancement accelerated dramatically. The world depicted is centuries ahead of our own technologically gleaming, futuristic, impossibly advanced. The visual style shifts to match clean, sleek, science fiction architecture. Everything is white and curved and lit by light sources you can't quite identify. The second universe is one that Stewie has been to before, that he calls his favorite, a Disney universe. The Griffins exist in it but are rendered in classic Disney animation, soft, fluid, expressive. The characters looking as though they were drawn in the 1950s. Brian and Lois speak in song briefly. The visual style is warm and golden and entirely unlike the regular show. It's a loving parody of Disney's aesthetic, but also genuinely beautiful in its own right. This universe is used for the episode's most iconic visual joke, the Disney-rendered version of the show's opening title card, which is itself a parody of a classic Disney film's opening, complete with the castle logo and the fireworks. The next destination is a Hanna-Barbera universe, rendered in the flat, simplified style of 1960s television animation. The characters are reduced to their most geometric essentials: circles, triangles, flat color fills. Movement is limited and deliberate. The jokes in this sequence are about the conventions of that animation style, the recycled backgrounds, the simple expressions, but the rendering is accurate and affectionate. Then comes the anime universe. The Griffins and Quahog are rendered in a Japanese animation style, large eyes, elaborate hair, dramatic lighting, the visual vocabulary of shonen action manga, and its animated adaptations. Meg in this universe has flowing hair and enormous expressive features. Stewie becomes a tiny hero type. Brian becomes a loyal companion. The visual shift is complete. The universe feels genuinely foreign compared to where the episode started. The black and white universe is perhaps the most striking visually. The Griffins and their world rendered in the style of 1930s animation, specifically the Fleischer Studios style that produced Betty Boop and early Popeye cartoons. Everything bounces. Everything is slightly off-model in the way that early animation was off-model. The characters' proportions shift as they move, bodies stretching and compressing with the music. It's technically impressive and aesthetically transporting. It makes the familiar characters feel genuinely alien. There is a universe where Germany won the Second World War, a bleaker, harder place that the episode handles with the brevity of a transition rather than lingering in it. There is a universe populated entirely by robots, a universe where the laws of physics work differently, a universe where Meg is beautiful and therefore everything about the family's dynamics has inverted. A universe that is a direct parody of the animated film The Secret of NIMH, a universe rendered entirely in the style of crude internet flash animation, deliberately bad, deliberately primitive, a send-up of early web animation culture. And then the final universe, the one Stewie created the device to get to originally. A universe where dogs are the dominant species and humans are their pets. Brian in this universe is a successful and respected member of society. He drives, he has a career, he lives a full human-scale life. And he has a human pet, a small, animal-like creature who bears a distinct resemblance to Peter Griffin. The reversal is funny, obviously, but it's also doing something. It's showing Brian a version of himself that has everything he wants: status, respect, a life that matches his intelligence. And then it takes it away because the device malfunctions and they have to leave. Brian glimpses the life where he belongs and then loses it, exactly as he loses everything in the show's regular timeline. The episode ends back in the normal Quahog, the regular animation, the familiar house. Brian and Stewie are home. The tour is over. Everything is as it was. But the tour changes how the regular Quahog feels. Having seen all those other versions, all those possibilities, the show's regular visual style seems richer, more deliberate, more specifically chosen, not just the default, but a choice. One universe among many that the show decided to inhabit. The multiverse episode raises a question that the show raises only here and nowhere else. If there are infinite versions of Quahog, infinite versions of the Griffins, why this one? What makes this particular universe the one the show inhabits? What is it about this specific version of Peter and Lois and Meg and Chris and Stewie and Brian that makes them the ones we spend time with? The episode doesn't answer this. It just shows the alternatives and lets you feel, by contrast, the particularity of what you usually have. This Peter, this family, this house, this street, not the Disney version, not the anime version, not the robot version, or the futuristic version, or the German victory version. This one, the regular one. The yellow sofa and the recliner and the piano and Brian with his martini. Why this one? Because this is the one that became ours. Because familiarity, accumulated over seasons and years, creates a specific kind of love that isn't about the quality of what's familiar, it's about the fact of it, the recognition, the sense of return. We come back to Quahog because it's the one we know, not because it's the best universe, because it's the one where we learned the names, and names, once learned, are held. The multiverse episode is, at its heart, a love letter to the show's regular aesthetic, a recognition that what looks mundane from inside it is actually extraordinary when viewed from outside. The Griffins are strange and wonderful. The show they live in is specific and irreplaceable. There is only one Family Guy, even if there are infinite Family Guys. The one in this universe is the one that matters, because it's the one you can come home to. Rest in that thought as the door closes on the last universe, and the device powers down and Brian and Stewie find themselves back on Spooner Street. Back in the regular house, back in the regular world. Home, exactly as left. The multiverse offered everything, and they came back here. That's the choice this town makes every episode. To stay, to be this, specifically this, in the face of all the other things it could be. And that stubbornness, that staying, is what makes it worth returning to. Every time, there's one final area to explore tonight, and it's the area where the show's most dedicated fans have built the most elaborate structures of interpretation. The grand theories. The ones that, if true, would change the meaning of everything we've talked about so far. Some of them are funny, some of them are unsettling, and some of them are strange enough to be true. Let's go to the theories. What the multiverse episode also does, less obviously, is establish the imaginative range of what Family Guy could be if it wanted. The Disney Universe sequence is genuinely beautiful. The anime sequence is genuinely exciting. The Fleischer-style black and white sequence is genuinely innovative. The show, in 30 minutes, demonstrates that it could have been any of these things, that its regular visual vocabulary was a choice, one option among many. This creates a strange retrospective feeling about the show's history. All those seasons of the standard animation style, the familiar color palette, the specific way the characters are drawn, these are not defaults. They are decisions. The choice to remain in this particular visual mode, this specific aesthetic, across more than 20 seasons, is itself a kind of commitment. Shows change their visual style for various reasons. Animation studios, budget, technology, creative direction. Family Guy has changed its visuals too, as we've noted elsewhere, as different studios handled different seasons. But the core aesthetic, the specific way Peter's face looks, the way Brian moves, the color of the living room's light has remained recognizable across all of it. You always know you're watching Family Guy. That consistency is, in the context of the multiverse episode, a philosophical statement. Of all the things this show could look like, it looks like this. Of all the ways it could render its world, it renders it this way. The commitment is to the specific, the familiar, the particular version that has been the one since 1999. The multiverse episode makes you feel that commitment as a choice rather than a given. And choices, once you recognize them as choices, acquire a different weight. There's a scene in the multiverse episode that doesn't get discussed as often as the visual set pieces. A quieter moment near the middle where Brian and Stewie, resting between universes, have a brief conversation about what they've seen. Brian makes an observation about the nature of parallel reality, something about identity, about whether the Brian in the Disney universe or the Brian in the robot universe is really Brian, or just a shape that resembles Brian without the specific history that makes Brian who he is. Stewie's response is characteristically arch. He points out that by Brian's logic, Brian himself is only Brian because of a specific and arbitrary chain of events. That in any given other universe, the events that made Brian Brian went differently, and the result is something that looks like Brian and might think like Brian but is, in some fundamental sense, different. Brian is quiet for a moment. Then he says something like, "Yes, that's what I mean," and the conversation moves on. It's a throwaway exchange in the context of an episode full of visual spectacle, but it's asking the question that the multiverse concept always asks: what makes you you, and how contingent is it? How many things had to happen in a specific way for the person you are to exist? And what does it mean that in another universe, those things went differently and something else exists instead? Brian Griffin is Brian Griffin because of a specific history in a specific quahog. He is the Brian who failed to finish his novel, who has an unresolved relationship with Stewie, who drinks too much and loves too imperfectly and keeps trying. In the Disney universe, that Brian doesn't exist. Something else does. The specific Brian, the one who matters, the one we've been talking about all night, he exists in this universe. The ordinary one, the regular animation one, the one with the yellow sofa. And here is the profound, simple, almost accidental truth at the heart of the multiverse episode. The ordinary universe, when you've seen all the alternatives, is not ordinary at all. It is the one where everything specific and irreplaceable happened, where Brian is Brian, and Stewie is Stewie, and the house is the house, and the family is the family, and all the mysteries we've been exploring tonight have accumulated into something that feels, across the distance of decades, like home. The multiverse offered everything. This universe is the one we know, the one with the names, the one that is ours. Come back to it, as Brian and Stewie come back to it, grateful maybe in a quiet way, for the specific universe we ended up in, for the particular arrangement of things. The device is back in the nursery. The universes are elsewhere. Spooner Street is quiet and warm and exactly itself. That's enough. That's more than enough. Now the theories. The ones that could change everything. The ones the most obsessive fans have assembled from thousands of hours of close watching. Some of them are uncomfortable. Some of them are extraordinary. All of them deserve to be heard. Let's finish the night in the deep end. There's one more universe in the multiverse episode that deserves a longer look, one that casual viewers tend to remember only as a quick visual joke, but which, on closer inspection, does something quietly remarkable. The universe where Meg is beautiful. In this version of reality, Meg Griffin is conventionally attractive. The episode depicts the Griffin family responding to this version of Meg with immediate and total warmth. Peter treats her well. The family includes her. The dynamics of the household have reorganized entirely around the fact that Meg is welcomed. The joke, on its surface, is about how shallow the family is. Change one physical variable, and everything changes. The depth of their care is exposed as conditional, dependent on appearance. But there's a second layer that's actually darker. Because in this universe, Meg is valued, and the Meg of the regular universe, who has the same interior life as this alternate Meg, is not. Everything essential about Meg is the same across universes. Her intelligence, her capacity for feeling, her desires, her fears, only her face is different. And for the Griffin family, apparently, that one variable changes everything. This is the multiverse episode briefly becoming a critique of the show itself. The show that has spent seasons treating Meg badly is, in this universe, showing you what it would look like if the arbitrary variable of appearance went the other way. And the critique is implicit. What has been done to Meg is not about who Meg is. It's about a single surface quality that the show decided would serve as the basis for her treatment. The universe with the beautiful Meg is the universe where Meg gets to be a person. In the regular universe, she's a punchline. The difference is not her. The difference is how she looks. If you needed any further evidence that the show, at some level, knows exactly what it has done to Meg, this is it. Encoded in the multiverse episode, flickering past in a few seconds, is the acknowledgement that Meg deserved better, that the treatment she received was arbitrary, that it was about the show's needs, not her nature. The multiverse says, we know. We know what this version of her costs. It doesn't fix it. It never fixed it, but it knew. Knowing and not fixing is its own kind of acknowledgement, a quiet guilt, a flash of clarity followed by the return to routine. Quahog returns to its regular universe. Meg's door is still closed. The family goes back to what it does, but the multiverse kept the other version. Somewhere, in the infinite proliferation of possible worlds, there is a Meg Griffin who is treated the way all versions of Meg deserve to be treated. She's out there. In a universe the show visited for 30 seconds and then left. She's out there and she's fine, and her family loves her. Let that be the image to rest on if the regular universe is too heavy tonight. The version of Quahog where Meg has what she deserves. Where the family got it right. It's possible. The multiverse confirms it. Possible is enough for now. Dream that universe tonight. The one where they got it right. The town holds it. All the versions of itself, including the best ones. And, somewhere, a different Meg is sleeping in a room whose door isn't closed, in a house that knows what it has. Sleep too. You've earned it. Section 12. The theories that change everything. There's a specific category of fan theory that does more than explain a plot hole or reconcile a continuity error. These theories reframe the entire show. They don't add to the story, they reshape it. They propose interpretations of what the show has always been doing that, if accepted, change the meaning of every scene, every character choice, every relationship. They are the theories that, once you've heard them, you can't quite unhear. Family Guy has generated more of these theories than almost any other animated show. Part of this is the show's length. 25 years of material gives fans an enormous archive to work with. Part of it is the show's inconsistencies, the gaps and contradictions and unexplained elements that invite interpretation. And part of it is something harder to name. The sense that beneath the comedy, beneath the shock and the cutaways and the gross-out jokes, the show is doing something it doesn't fully acknowledge. Carrying something. Asking something. The theories are where that feeling gets articulated. Let's start with the one that has the most evidence and the most unsettling implications. The theory is called the Brian Theory, and its central claim is this. Brian Griffin is the author of Family Guy. Not in a metafictional way where Brian knows he's on a TV show. In the show's internal reality, everything we watch is Brian's novel. The show we've been watching for 25 years is the book Brian has been trying to write. The one he's never finished. The one that's always almost done. The evidence begins with the most obvious fact about Brian. He is a writer. He identifies as a writer. Writing is the central ambition of his life. And he has been working on a novel faster than the speed of love for the entire run of the show. Now consider the show's perspective. Whose point of view is the show? It doesn't have a single narrator. It doesn't consistently follow one character. It moves freely between everyone in the family and in the town. It knows things that Brian knows, Brian's thoughts, Brian's memories, and also things that Brian couldn't know. It knows what Stewie says in the crib when no one is listening. It knows what Peter thinks while Brian is in another room. It knows the histories and inner lives of characters Brian has never met. This is initially a problem for the theory a novel has to have a perspective, and Brian can't know everything he'd need to know to write this. But the theory's proponents suggest that this is by design. Brian is an unreliable narrator who has given himself access beyond his real access. He has imagined what the other characters think. He has speculated about their inner lives. The show is not a documentary of Quahog's reality, it's Brian's artistic construction of it, his invented version of the world he lives in. This explains some of the show's most persistent oddities. The cutaway gags, those sudden departures into unrelated scenes, are Brian's writing method. He goes off on tangents. He follows associations. He interrupts himself with references and jokes and memories. The show's structure, chaotic and associative, is the structure of Brian's mind on the page. The inconsistencies in the show's tone, the sudden emotional resonance of episodes that are otherwise comedic, the way the show can be genuinely touching and then immediately absurd are explained by Brian's emotional state while writing. He writes from a place of genuine affection for the people around him, and that affection surfaces in the text despite his ironic posture. The warmth that the show has, buried under the comedy, is Brian's warmth. The love he doesn't say out loud, written down. The fact that Brian is always there but rarely the center of the story, that he exists in the margins of everyone else's drama, observing, commenting, occasionally intervening maps onto the experience of writing a novel about people other than yourself. Brian watches, he records, he interprets, he gives it all to the page. And the novel is never finished. It can never be finished. Because the story of his family is ongoing. Because Quahog keeps happening. Because every time he thinks he has it, something new occurs. And he has to keep writing, faster than the speed of love. The protagonist who can fly. Who moves too fast for the things that hold people in place? That protagonist is Brian, writing himself into the story he's observing. The one character in Faster Than the Speed of Love, who has the freedom he doesn't have in his real life. The one who escapes the category. The one who gets to be more than what he is. This theory doesn't need to be confirmed to be useful. It's a frame, and frames change what you see. The second major theory is simpler in structure and darker in implication. It's sometimes called the Peter's reality theory, and it argues that the show takes place entirely inside Peter Griffin's imagination. The evidence here is behavioral. The show that exists matches how Peter would perceive the world. Himself at the center of everything, everyone around him defined largely by their relationship to him, consequence that never permanently damages him, a wife who loves him despite everything, children who are exaggerated versions of types that Peter's mind would generate. The logic of the show, its silliness, its reliance on simple cause and effect, its tendency to resolve in Peter's favor is the logic of a man who doesn't think very hard about how things work. The cutaway gags in this theory are Peter's thoughts. When the show cuts to a random scene, it's Peter's brain making an association. When the show follows a story logic that seems to have nothing to do with realism, it's Peter's realism, the realism of a man who has never examined his assumptions. The dark edge of this theory comes from what it implies about the characters around Peter. If everything is Peter's imagination, then Lois is not a real person with a real inner life. She is Peter's version of Lois. The same is true of his children, his friends, his co-workers. Everyone in Quahog is a projection. There is no Meg who is suffering. There is only Peter's version of Meg. The character Peter's mind has assigned the role of family disappointment, because that role serves a function in Peter's internal narrative. This reading is darker than the show would probably want, but it explains a lot. The way characters are defined too specifically by their relationship to Peter. The way events that should traumatize them don't stick. The way the world consistently makes room for Peter's needs. It's all consistent with a dreamer dreaming himself at the center. There's a variant of this theory that is less psychologically extreme but equally interesting, that the show is Peter's memory. Not an ongoing hallucination, but a reconstruction. Peter, in old age or in some future state remembering his life in Quahog, and memory, as we know, is not accurate. It's selective. It flattens characters into their most memorable traits. It exaggerates incidents. It makes you funnier and your children more defined and your wife more patient than any of them actually were. Peter's memory of his life, of the years on Spooner Street, of the beers at the Drunken Clam, of the things that happened and the things that almost happened has the texture of the show. Self-centered, affectionate, inconsistent, warm at the core. This is memory. This is how we remember the people we loved. In vivid strokes, without nuance, with all the best and worst moments lit equally, the middle ground faded away. The third theory is the one that gets the fewest adherents, but that I think is the most secretly true, and it has nothing to do with who is narrating or imagining. It's a theory about what the show is fundamentally about, underneath all the content. The theory is this: Family Guy is a show about what it means to belong to something imperfect. Not a family specifically, not Quahog specifically, something. A thing that is yours that you were born into or stumbled into or couldn't escape, that is flawed and inconsistent and sometimes genuinely harmful, and that you love anyway, that you come back to, that you carry. Every character in the show belongs to something imperfect. Peter belongs to a family that he regularly damages, and that regularly damages him. Brian belongs to a household that doesn't fully understand him. Stewie belongs to an infancy he can't escape, despite being fully formed as a person. Meg belongs to a family that treats her badly and that she chooses, again and again, to stay with. The show's deepest subject is not comedy. It's loyalty, the irrational, unjustifiable, deeply human practice of staying committed to things that have no claim on your rational self. The Griffin family has almost no reason to stay together by any objective measure. They would all be better off somewhere else. But they stay. Episode after episode, season after season, they stay. And the audience stays too. Millions of people who have watched this family for 25 years, who have watched it decline in some critics' estimation, who have watched it do things that bothered them and make choices they disagreed with, and produce episodes that seemed lazy or mean or wrong. And they're still here. That loyalty, viewer loyalty, and character loyalty, both is what the show is actually about. Not the cutaway gags, not the shock value, not the mythology or the theories or the mysteries. The mystery at the center of Family Guy is, why do we keep showing up for things we know are imperfect? Why do we love what we love even when it disappoints us? The show has never answered this question directly, but it has demonstrated through its own existence that the question isn't rhetorical. People show up. They keep showing up. And the showing up, for no good reason other than that it's ours and we're used to it and it's there, is itself the answer. 31 Spooner Street. The yellow sofa, the warm light, it's ours. That's all. That's everything. And as the night deepens and your breathing slows and Quahog settles into its eternal present, the town that never changes, the family that never ages, the clock that doesn't move, let that belonging carry you toward sleep. You know these people. You know this house. You've been here before. The lights are low. Brian is somewhere comfortable. Stewie is in his crib or not in his crib. It depends on the episode. Peter is in his chair. Lois is wherever Lois needs to be. Meg's door is closed. Chris is asleep already. The town is quiet. The harbor is dark. The bar is closed. Everything is as it was. Everything is as it will be. Quahog holds. It always holds. And so do you. If this kept you company tonight, the most meaningful thing you can do is subscribe. It tells the channel that this kind of long-form, atmospheric, genuinely weird deep dive is worth making more of. More towns, more histories, more nights like this one. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the dark again soon. Let's go deeper into the Brian theory, because it rewards extended examination in ways that a brief summary doesn't capture. If Brian is writing the show, then the most emotionally resonant episodes, the ones that fans consistently cite as the best the show has produced, are Brian at his most genuine. Brian and Stewie, the bottle episode where they're trapped in the bank vault and Brian reveals his suicidal ideation, is the chapter where the novel stops being about everyone else and becomes about Brian. The author surfaces. The character drops the performance. What remains is grief and love and the terrible, tender honesty of a person who has decided for one moment to be completely real. The episode works because it feels different. It has a different texture from the show around it. Fans describe watching it as a different experience, quieter, closer, more like reading than watching. If Brian is the author, this is the episode where the author looked at the page and couldn't figure out how to be anywhere other than inside it. Similarly, the episodes where Brian's relationship with Stewie is most fully realized, the road to episodes. The moments of genuine friendship are the passages in Brian's novel where he is writing the thing he loves most. Stewie is Brian's most beloved creation in this reading. The child he didn't have, the friend he found, the person who sees him most clearly. Every scene where Stewie tells Brian he matters is Brian writing down what he most needs to hear. This makes the failure of Brian's other writing, the self-help book, the failed attempts, the pages crossed out, more comprehensible. He can't finish the novel about the flying man because the novel about the flying man is not the real novel. The real novel is this: the family, Quahog, everything he's observing from the margins of someone else's story. He is writing it. He has been writing it since 1999. It's not done because Quahog keeps happening. It may never be done. And maybe that's all right. Maybe an unfinished novel that is also your whole life is not a failure. Maybe it's just a life, in progress, accumulating. Maybe that's all any of us are writing. The theories that surround Family Guy share something when you look at them together. They are all attempts to find intention in what appears to be accident. To find authorship in what appears to be chaos. To discover that the inconsistencies and the contradictions and the moments that don't quite make sense are not mistakes but meanings. This is what obsessive fans do with the shows they love. They look for the author behind the text. They look for the design beneath the surface. They believe, and this belief is sometimes rewarded, that nothing is accidental in a thing someone cared about enough to make. That every odd detail, every unresolved thread, every mystery is there because someone somewhere thought it should be there. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes the mystery really was intentional. Sometimes the thing that looks like a mistake is a message. And sometimes what's there is just the beautiful accident of a story told by many people over many years, accumulating complexity they didn't plan, generating depth they didn't design, becoming more interesting than anyone intended. Family Guy is probably both, planned and accidental, designed and drifted into. The early seasons deliberate and controlled, the later seasons sprawling and inconsistent. And across all of it, the weight of time, 25 years of Quahog, 25 years of this family, 25 years of people finding each other in the dark and spending an hour in a strange and impossible town. The theories are not the truth, but they are a way of honoring the investment, a way of saying, we looked at this carefully, we found something. The show gave us enough to work with that we could build these structures. It earned our attention, and we gave it our best thinking. That's not nothing. That's in fact what art is supposed to do. Generate interpretation, invite investment, become something to think about in the dark. Family Guy, for all its faults, has done this for 25 years. It has given millions of people something to think about, something to return to, something that is theirs in a way that few cultural objects manage to be. The mysteries don't resolve. They accumulate. And in the accumulation, Quahog becomes real, not in the way that real towns are real, but in the way that beloved things are real. Present in the mind. Populated by faces, you know. Legible in the dark. That's real enough. That's more than real enough. Let the town dissolve now. Gently. Let the streets go quiet. Let the lights go out, one by one, in the windows of the houses on Spooner Street. Peter's recliner is empty. Brian's glass is almost empty. The piano is silent. Stewie's nursery glows faintly. Something in there, always something in there, humming with potential. The show is always on somewhere. In some time zone, on some screen, Quahog is playing. Brian is making a joke. Peter is doing something that will need explaining. Meg's door is closed. The eternal present holds. And in the eternal present, everything is fine. Everything is always fine in Quahog. That's the promise. That's the miracle. Sleep.